Rick lied to Morty about guards being robots to manipulate his grandson into committing his first murder in the pilot episode. The Smiths received $16,000 from the deep state for stepping on a trailer park with their giant robot. Every giant bug they killed in Gotron was actually trying to deliver the cure for AIDS. And those are just 3 of the disturbing R&M details in this video. Can you imagine all the messed up stuff there is to uncover when we dive deep into 100 disturbing Rick and Morty details explained over the next few hours? I was certainly shocked by some of the stuff I found when I made this video, so if you're ready to be blown away by what's about to come, sit back, relax, maybe don't think too hard about what's in Rick's second freezer drawer, and let's begin. So Rick's bedroom gets shown exactly once in the entire first season, and honestly, dude's got a full-blown conspiracy theorist setup going on. We're talking photos, strings connecting everything. The whole beautiful mind meets your uncle who won't shut up about chemtrails aesthetic. Except Rick's wall isn't tracking lizard people or whatever, he's tracking his own adventures with Morty. This happens in the post-credits scene of close Rick counters of the Rick kind, where Jerry's in Rick's room being sad about doofus Rick leaving. While Jerry's having his moment, you can spot Rick's wall covered in pictures from every adventure they've had so far. Mr. Meeseeks is up there, Dr. Xenon Bloom from Anatomy Park, a Zagarion, Rick's flying saucer, his death ray. And here's the disturbing part. Aberdolf Linkler is on the wall too, even though that episode hasn't happened yet. Rick's literally tracking adventures that haven't aired. The really messed up thing isn't just that Rick keeps souvenirs like some interdimensional scrapbooker, it's that he's connecting them with strings. Classic, conspiracy, wall, energy. Which means Rick thinks there's a pattern. He's trying to figure something out, piece together some larger puzzle that involves all these seemingly random adventures. Think about what that implies. Every adventure Morty thinks is just Rick being random and chaotic might actually be planned. Something Rick is investigating. And he's been doing it since the beginning, documenting everything, trying to connect dots that Morty doesn't even know exist. The show never comes back to this wall, never explains what Rick was tracking or why. It's just there for one post-credits scene, then gone forever. Which is somehow more unsettling than if they'd made it a whole plot point, because now we know Rick's running some kind of long-game investigation, using his grandson as what? A sidekick? A tool? And Morty has absolutely no idea. Now, let's talk about the next detail from the same episode, close Rick counters of the Rick kind. When we finally see Rick's bedroom for the first and only time, there's a conspiracy wall. Photos everywhere, strings connecting them, the full paranoid detective aesthetic. And among all the pictures of past adventures, there's a photo of Aberdolf Linkler. You know, the Abraham Lincoln Adolf Hitler hybrid that Rick created. Except there's one tiny problem. We haven't met this guy yet. The Aberdolf Linkler episode doesn't air until next week. Rixie Business is literally episode 11, and we're currently watching the post-credits of episode 10. Rick has a picture of a character on his wall before that character appears in the show, which means either the animators made a hilarious mistake, or Rick actually knows what's coming next in his own timeline. And honestly, the mistake theory doesn't hold up, because everything else on that wall references past episodes. Mr. Meeseeks from episode 5, Dr. Xenon Bloom from episode 3, the Zagarion from episode 4. It's all stuff that already happened, except Aberdolf Linkler, who's just chilling there like he's already part of Rick's documented history. So either Rick has some kind of precognitive ability he's never mentioned, or he's operating on a completely different timeline than we're watching. Maybe he's already lived through Rixie Business, and we're seeing events out of order. Maybe Rick experiences time non-linearly and just never bothered mentioning it because, you know, Rick. The really disturbing part? If Rick knows what's coming next, that means every time Morty thinks they're going on some spontaneous adventure, Rick might already know exactly how it ends. Every moment of danger, every close call, every traumatic experience, Rick saw it coming and took Morty there anyway. That's deliberately orchestrating your grandson's trauma with full knowledge of the consequences. Now let's move to a new episode, Meeseeks and Destroy. When Morty meets Mr. Jellybean in that bathroom, most viewers just see it as the show going to a really dark place out of nowhere. Random character, horrifying assault scene, Rick takes revenge, post-credits reveals he was a serial predator. Shocking, disturbing, moving on. But here's the thing nobody catches. This isn't a random character at all. King Jellybean is actually a returning character from Justin Roiland's earlier work, just redesigned. Back when Roiland was making shorts for Channel 101 before Rick and Morty existed, he created a character called Crumply Crumplestein, same basic design as King Jellybean, same cheerful jelly bean appearance. Except, in those old shorts, Crumply Crumplestein straight up murdered the kids and mutilated their bodies. Like, explicitly. That was the character's whole deal in those early cartoons. So when Roiland brought this character into Rick and Morty as King Jellybean, he was essentially toning down an even more disturbing version, which is absolutely insane when you think about what King Jellybean does in the episode. The assault scene is already one of the darkest moments in the entire series. The post-credits revelation about the lockbox full of photos of other victims is genuinely horrifying. And that's the sanitized version of this character. What makes this extra disturbing is that it means this wasn't some random creative decision. Roiland specifically chose to bring back one of his most twisted characters and integrate him into Morty's simple, fun adventure. The whole Jack and the Beanstalk parody was just window dressing. The real point was reintroducing Crumply Crumplestein to a much wider audience, just under a different name. Now let's move to a new episode, Raising Gazorpazorp. So, Morty's room shows up throughout the series, and most people don't pay attention to the background decorations because they're focused on whatever insane conversation is happening. But if you actually freeze frame and look at what's on Morty's walls, things get weird. There's a poster that says, Darth Buddha, sitting right there under his magnet poster. Darth Vader crossed with Buddha. Violence meets enlightenment. The dark side meets inner peace. That's already a strange choice for a 14-year-old's bedroom, but it gets weirder when you look at what's on his shelf. Morty has 2 WWI helmets sitting on top of his bookshelf. Not replicas, not toys, actual military helmets. On the left is the French Adrian helmet from World War I. On the right is the German M1916 Stahlhelm. Both sides of the same war, just chilling on Morty's shelf next to his action figures. Think about that for a second. Morty collects helmets from a war where millions of people died in trenches, a war famous for its absolute brutality, poison gas, and psychological trauma. And he's got souvenirs from both sides displayed like trophies. This is the same kid who has a science flag on his wall and gets traumatized by almost every adventure. But apparently in his downtime, he's really into WWI military equipment. The show never explains where he got these helmets or why he has them. Rick's never mentioned taking Morty to any historical battlefields. There's no episode about Morty developing an interest in military history. They're just there, in every shot of his room, completely unexplained. Which means either Morty independently developed a fascination with one of history's deadliest conflicts, or someone gave him actual war relics, and he thought, yeah, I'll put these next to my toys. Combined with the Darth Buddha poster, you start getting a picture of a kid who's weirdly drawn to the intersection of violence and philosophy, war and peace, destruction and meditation, which makes sense when you think about it, because that's basically what every adventure with Rick is. Morty's constantly being forced to reconcile horrific violence with some kind of larger meaning or purpose. His bedroom decorations suggest he's been thinking about this stuff even before Rick showed up. Now let's move to a new episode, M. Night Shyamalan's. But remember to subscribe to our channel. So Morty's room shows up in this episode, and if you actually freeze frame and look at what's on his shelf, things get weird. Morty has 2 WWI helmets sitting on top of his bookshelf next to his action figures. On the left is the French Adrian helmet from World War I. On the right is the German M1916 Stahlhelm. Both sides of the same war, just chilling there like souvenirs. Think about that. Morty collects helmets from a war where millions of people died in trenches, a war famous for its brutality, poison gas, and psychological trauma. This is the same kid who gets traumatized by almost every adventure with Rick. But apparently he's really into WWI military equipment. The show never explains where he got these, or why he has them. Rick never mentions taking Morty to historical battlefields. There's no episode about Morty developing an interest in military history. They're just there, in every shot of his room, completely unexplained. Either Morty independently developed a fascination with one of history's deadliest conflicts, or someone gave him actual war relics, and he put them next to his toys. The disturbing part is that he has both sides, French and German. Like he's collecting perspectives on the same horror. He's documenting opposing forces that slaughtered each other by the millions. That's a really dark way for a 14-year-old to engage with history, suggesting Morty's been thinking about violence and conflict way before Rick showed up. Moving on to a Rick in King Morcher's Mort, There's a deeply unsettling detail about the Knight's detection technology that reveals a dark history. When Morty agrees to cut off his dick to save the solar system, they make him walk through multiple scanners. First, a machine that checks for nanotechnological hologram dicks. He passes. Then a second machine for emergency clone dicks. He passes. Then they reveal there's a third detector. But here's the disturbing part, one Knight says. We don't like to reveal them until the previous detecting threshold has been crossed. And the third detector? It scans for prosthetic dicks and witchcraft dicks. This means there's a history here. The Knights didn't just randomly develop 3 increasingly specific dick detection technologies. Multiple people over the years must have tried to fake their genital mutilation using progressively more elaborate methods, prosthetics, starting with basic prosthetics, escalating to cloning technology, then hologram tech, and apparently even witchcraft. Each detector represents someone who successfully fooled the previous generation of scanners. The Knights kept upgrading their detection capabilities like it's an arms race between desperate kings trying to keep their dicks and a society determined to verify their ceremonial castration. We've updated our terms of service to close that loophole energy, except the loophole is keeping your genitals. The episode treats this as a throwaway gag, but it implies centuries of people attempting and occasionally succeeding at fooling genital verification technology until the next detection method was invented. Very normal cultural tradition. Now let's move to a new episode, the Ricklantis mix-up. So this entire episode takes place on the Citadel, while Rick and Morty are off having their Atlantis adventure. We follow different storylines about life there, the presidential election, cop partners, factory workers, school kids, and throughout the episode, people keep dying. Campaign manager Morty gets shot and ejected from an airlock. Cop Morty shoots people. Evil Morty becomes president and executes the Shadow Council of Ricks by sending them out the airlock. But here's what most people miss in that final shot. When they're ejecting the dead Shadow Council members, the camera pulls back to reveal dozens of other corpses already floating in space outside the Citadel. These bodies have been accumulating. Campaign manager Morty is out there. Big Morty, investigator Rick, cop Morty, and a bunch of other Ricks and Mortys we never even met. The Citadel has been using their airlocks as a body disposal system for who knows how long. This isn't Evil Morty's innovation. This is standard operating procedure. The government has been systematically executing people and dumping them into space, creating this permanent cloud of corpses orbiting their society. And apparently nobody inside talks about it or acknowledges it exists. Think about that. It's visible from the windows. Anyone looking out into space can see the evidence of countless murders just floating there. But it's so normalized that it doesn't register as disturbing to the people living there anymore. That's the Citadel in a nutshell. Death is so routine, it becomes part of the scenery. Now let's move to a new episode, the Whirly-Durly Conspiracy. So, Rick and Jerry are trying to board a Galaxy-class cruise ship to get home, and security stops them. The alarm goes off, and the security guard says Rick has Class C or above cybernetic augmentations, emphasis on the above. They hit him with a synaptic dampener because he's considered too dangerous to fly without being neutralized first. Most people just laugh at drugged-up Rick asking for cookies and Avatar, then move on. But wait, think about what Class C or above actually means. Rick isn't just carrying cybernetic weapons or gadgets. The implants are part of his body, permanent modifications. And we're not talking about 1 or 2 enhancements. The security system detected enough augmentation to flag him as a serious threat requiring immediate neutralization. Based on what we see throughout the series, Rick has cybernetic implants in both his arms and legs, his left eye, part of his brain, and his chest. That's someone who's systematically replaced huge portions of his biological body with machinery. He's closer to being a cyborg than a human at this point. And here's the really disturbing part. We never get an explanation for when or why this happened. Did Rick slowly replace his body parts as they failed? Was it all at once, after some catastrophic injury? Did he do it voluntarily to enhance himself, or was it necessary for survival? The show just drops this detail and never addresses it again. Rick constantly talks about how nothing matters and everything's meaningless, but maybe that's easier to believe when you're barely human anymore. Moving on to Morty's Mind Blowers, where we learn that Rick will make you dig your own grave if you flip the wrong light switch. Very proportionate response to a minor inconvenience. So Rick asks Morty to hit the leftmost light switch. Morty flips the wrong one first, realizes his mistake, corrects it, then in the darkness, quietly unflips the first switch out of shame. Rick heard all 3 clicks. Very observant king. Rick's response to this extremely minor, immediately corrected error? grab a shovel. Morty's confused. Rick repeats, grab a shovel. The episode then shows a rapid-fire sequence of Rick doing increasingly unhinged things. Searching for zip ties. Can't find them. Says, fuck it. And there's beeping, magnetizing sounds, and women screaming in the background. Then Rick says, zip tie, like he just solved a pleasant puzzle. We never see exactly what happened, but whatever Rick did to Morty over that light switch mistake was traumatic enough that Morty begged to have the memory erased. And Rick agreed to erase it, which means even HE knew he went too far. The bar for too far in this relationship is somewhere near the Earth's core, so that's saying something. This is like if your dad made you help him hide a body because you brought home a B+ instead of an A, except the body is probably yours, metaphorically speaking. Very normal household discipline. Definitely something a child therapist would approve of. Narrator, they would not. Moving on to Rattlestar Ricklactica, where Rick treats healthcare like a freemium mobile game. You get the basic version for free, but full healing costs extra. This is what you get for not subscribing to Rick Premium. So Jerry finally finishes putting up his Christmas lights and falls off the roof, breaking his leg. The episode shows him screaming in pain. Rick's response? I healed your leg 50%. The rest is on you, big man. 50%. Not fully healed. Not even 75%. Rick pulled out his sci-fi healing ray, zapped Jerry's broken leg, and then just stopped. On purpose. Mid-heal. Jerry's leg is still broken, just half as broken as before. Very thoughts and prayers energy, except the thoughts are fuck you, and the prayers are figure it out yourself. Rick could absolutely finish the job. Probably takes the same amount of effort as half healing him, but he made an executive decision to leave his son-in-law hobbling around with a partially shattered femur. This is like if your doctor performed half a surgery and then told you to YouTube the rest. Rick's using medical intervention as a passive-aggressive teaching moment. You don't get full healing because you didn't earn full healing. Very normal family dynamic. Definitely something Blue Cross would approve of. Narrator, they would not. They would not. Jerry has to walk around with a half-fixed leg because Rick decided arbitrary suffering builds character. That's spite with a coupon code for 50% off. Welcome to Rick's health insurance plan, where the deductible is your dignity and the copay is knowing he could help more but won't. Moving on to Never Ricking Morty, where we learn that somewhere in the multiverse, teenagers are staying celibate to prevent reality from collapsing. I can't come to prom, I'm busy maintaining the fabric of existence. So there's this segment about Floaty Blood Man, a guy who's literally suspended in space, slowly dying in time-dilated agony. The episode explains he's suspended in disbelief, slowly dying while living out an alternative non-diegetic reality. Basically, this dude's been torn in half and is experiencing his own personal nightmare dimension while bleeding out for eternity. Fun. But here's where it gets weirder. Floaty Blood Man has become a religious figure. There are two main sects. One group thinks the entire universe is his dying nightmare and will cease to exist when he finally dies. The other group, the Floaty Nogasm Brotherhood, believes they're keeping him and the universe alive by staying virgins and redirecting their suppressed sexual energies. So there's a cult of teenagers who refuse to have sex because they think their blue balls are the only thing preventing universal extinction. Very sorry, babe. Can't hook up tonight. Gotta maintain the cosmic status quo with my sexual frustration. One guy literally tells his girlfriend, I'm staying a virgin just to keep the universe existing. She thinks that's attractive. They start hooking up. Floaty Blood Man immediately screams in agony and presumably, reality starts collapsing. Turns out cosmic cock-blocking was load-bearing for the entire universe. Welcome to Rick and Morty, where even your sex life has existential consequences, and some guy's eternal suffering has somehow become everyone else's abstinence-only education program. Now let's move to a new episode, Rick Mancing the Stone. So, this episode deals heavily with how the family is processing Beth and Jerry's divorce. Summer and Morty are acting out by joining a post-apocalyptic death cult. Rick's enabling their worst impulses, and everyone's avoiding dealing with their feelings. But there's this one background detail that reveals just how dark Beth's coping mechanisms are. At some point during the episode, Beth takes a family photo with Jerry in it and literally covers his face with a picture of a horse head, not a sticker, not just flipping the photo down. She specifically chose to place equine anatomy over her ex-husband's face in what was presumably once a happy family memory. That's weirdly specific and deeply unsettling. Beth's a horse surgeon, so horses are her professional life. But using horse parts to literally erase Jerry from family photos suggests she's conflating her work with her emotional trauma in some really unhealthy ways. It's like she's turning him into just another body she can dissect and work on, depersonalizing him completely. The show treats it as a throwaway visual gag, but think about what it means. Beth is so unable to process the divorce that she's symbolically mutilating images of her husband using her job as the weapon. She's a surgeon, trained to cut into bodies, and now she's treating memories of Jerry like specimens. Later in the episode, we literally see Beth making sculptures out of horse hooves. Her entire relationship with her work has become this twisted outlet for rage and pain she won't address directly. Now let's move to a new episode, Get Swifty. So Morty's at Bird Person's house, trying to figure out what to do about Earth being held hostage in a deadly singing competition. Bird Person is giving him this whole speech about having faith in Rick, and he gestures to this wall of photos, showing him and Rick throughout their adventures together. And right there, in the last photo shown, is Rick holding a baby. The show wants you to assume it's just a random baby from some adventure, but fans who freeze-framed it realize something deeply wrong with that image. That baby is almost certainly Morty, which creates a massive timeline problem that the show has never explained. We know from multiple episodes that Rick abandoned Beth's family and was gone for 20 years. He only came back recently, moving into the garage when the show starts. Morty is 14 years old. Do the math. Rick wasn't around when Morty was a baby. He couldn't have been. The timeline doesn't work. So either that photo is from a different dimension where Rick stayed with his family, or this isn't the original Morty we've been following, or Rick's entire backstory about being gone for 20 years is a lie. None of these options are comforting. The show just drops this photo into Bird Person's house and never addresses it. It's sitting there on the wall, proof that something fundamental about Rick and Morty's relationship doesn't add up. Either Rick has been dimension hopping between versions of his family for way longer than we thought, or we're not watching the original Morty at all. Now let's go back to an earlier episode, Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind. So the Council of Ricks captures Rick and hooks him up to a machine that scans his memories, trying to prove he murdered a bunch of Ricks. They're rifling through his brain, and we see flashes of various memories projected on screens. Among those memories are images of Rick with a baby Morty, not someone else's Morty, his Morty, the Morty standing right there in the room. But here's the problem. Rick was gone for 20 years. He abandoned Beth's family long before Morty was born. We know this from multiple episodes. It's established canon. Rick only recently came back and moved into the garage when the series begins. Morty is 14 years old and has lived his whole life without Rick until now. So why does Rick have memories of baby Morty stored in his brain? Memories the machine is reading directly from his neural pathways. These aren't fake memories or implants. This is Rick's actual brain, showing him holding an infant version of the grandson he supposedly never met until recently. The show never explains this, never even acknowledges the contradiction. Either Rick's been secretly visiting from other dimensions to check in on baby Morty without anyone knowing, or Rick has memories from a different timeline that he somehow retained. Or worst of all, this Morty isn't the original Morty from this dimension at all. Rick just grabbed one from somewhere else who happened to have the right age and backstory. That last option would explain why Rick's so cavalier about Morty dying. He's already replaced him before. But if you're enjoying the video so far, don't forget to subscribe. Moving on to Look Who's Purging Now, where Rick gaslights Morty about committing mass murder as an act of grandfather-grandson bonding. Nothing says I love you like enabling your grandson's dissociation from reality. The episode's about Rick and Morty getting stuck on a purge planet where Morty goes on an absolute rampage, screaming at people while mowing down crowds, shooting corpses for fun, even threatening to kill Rick. Very wholesome family content. At the end, Morty's feeling ashamed about his murder spree. Rick reassures him those candy bars from earlier had a chemical called purginol that amplifies violent tendencies. Morty's immediately relieved. It wasn't really him, just the drugs. Rick confirms, don't even sweat. You're still the same old Morty. Your character's totally protected. Then the show reveals the truth. Rick throws the candy bar wrapper away. The label reads, now purginol free. The candy bars never had the violence drug. Morty murdered all those people completely sober. He enjoyed every second of it, the screaming, the corpse shooting. All of it was 100% authentic Morty rage. Very, what if we just never talked about this again? Energy. But Rick saw his grandson spiraling into an existential crisis and decided the kindest thing to do was lie. Gaslight him into thinking it was drug-induced, so Morty never has to process that he's capable of gleeful mass murder. Rick literally rewrites Morty's memory of his own actions to protect his mental health. This is basically what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, except Vegas is genocide, and staying there means living in denial forever. Very therapeutic approach to generational trauma. Now let's move to a new episode, the Rick Shank Redemption. So the Galactic Federation has Rick hooked up to a brainalyzer, and they're trying to extract the formula for interdimensional travel from his memories. While the bug interrogator is navigating through Rick's mind, trying to find the right memory, we get a glimpse of Rick's mental landscape. It's designed to look like a Shoney's restaurant, but outside the windows you can see various memories floating around, like buildings in a cityscape. The interrogator specifically mentions what's out there, Rick's memory of a special person, where he was on 9/11, and his favorite sports blooper, all treated with equal weight, just random memories in the collection. But here's the disturbing part. When the camera briefly shows the 9/11 memory, we see Rick watching the attacks on television, and he's saying something about how they're going to use this as an excuse to strip away our freedoms. That's a pretty loaded thing to drop into the show. Rick's immediate reaction to one of the most traumatic events in modern American history wasn't horror or grief. It was instant political cynicism about government overreach and the erosion of civil liberties. He saw it happening in real time and immediately understood how it would be weaponized. The show doesn't dwell on it. It's just there for a split second. Another memory in Rick's vast collection of experiences across infinite dimensions. But it reveals something dark about his worldview. Even before he became the most jaded man in the universe, he was already that guy. Moving to the next detail. Still in the Rick Shank Redemption. So Rick finally comes home after escaping from Galactic Federation prison. The family's back together, Beth is thrilled to have her dad home, and everyone's talking about fresh starts and new adventures. Rick heads into his garage to get back to work. Everything seems back to normal, except if you look closely at the walls and ceiling of the garage, there are still visible cracks everywhere. These aren't new damage. They're from the Season 1 finale, Ricksy Business, when Rick threw that massive house party that got so out of control, it literally damaged the structural integrity of the building. That was like 20 episodes ago in the show's timeline. Nobody fixed it. Nobody even mentions it. The cracks are just part of the garage now, part of the house. Permanent scars from when Rick's chaos got too big to contain. Beth and Jerry just live with it. They patched up enough to keep the roof from caving in and called it a day. And that's kind of the perfect metaphor for this family, isn't it? They don't heal from the damage Rick causes, they just accumulate it. Layer after layer of trauma and destruction that becomes the new baseline. The cracks in the garage are still there because nothing Rick breaks ever gets fully repaired. It just becomes part of the background, normalized, until nobody even sees it anymore. The house is literally falling apart around them, and they've learned to stop noticing. Still, in the Rick Shank Redemption, we need to talk about the Galactic Federation interrogator having a full-on McDonald's mukbang while watching Rick's family explode. So Rick's showing this bug dude the memory of his wife Diane and daughter Beth dying in a portal bomb explosion. This is supposedly the most traumatic moment of Rick's entire life, the event that broke him. Young Rick screams, "No," as the bomb detonates and his family literally disintegrates. And what's the bug doing during this entire sequence? Eating McNuggets with Szechuan sauce, just casually munching away. Very, I'm gonna need snacks for this energy, except this is watching someone's family die in 4 kelvins. The episode shows him actively eating as the explosion happens. Then, as the smoke clears from Rick's dead family, Bug Dude's reaction is, "Wow, this sauce is fucking amazing. You said it was promoting a movie? That's it. No horror. No, oh my god, that's terrible. Just a Yelp review of the dipping sauce." He's treating this like he's watching a Marvel movie, where he already knows everyone comes back in the sequel. Watching someone's wife and child explode is so unremarkable to him that he can't even pause his snack break. Here's the extra disturbing layer. The show later reveals this memory might be completely fake, which means Rick potentially crafted this horrific death scene, knowing the interrogator would watch his family die while eating fast food and not give a single shit. He predicted the exact level of casual sociopathy he was dealing with, and just built his lie around it. Very normal workplace behavior. Definitely something you see at every office. HR would like a word. Moving on to the Ricks Must Be Crazy, where we learn that one scientist missed his own father's funeral because he was too busy building a battery universe. Capitalism, baby. The episode's about Rick discovering someone in his battery universe, the microverse, has created their own battery universe, the miniverse, and that person discovers someone in their universe has created yet another battery universe, the Teenyverse. Very Inception meets indentured servitude. But here's the buried tragedy. Kyle, the teenyverse scientist, has this realization mid-fight when Rick and Zeep are beating the crap out of each other. So he made a universe, and that guy is from that universe, and that's the universe where I was born, where my father died, where I couldn't make time for his funeral because I was working on my universe. Kyle missed his own father's funeral to work on a device that would enslave an entire civilization to power his world's economy. He was so consumed with creating his teenyverse battery that he couldn't even attend the burial of the man who raised him. Very cat's in the cradle, except the kid grows up to commit mass enslavement instead of just being emotionally distant. And here's the kicker. He says this right after learning his entire reality only exists to be Rick's car battery. Kyle sacrificed his relationship with his dying father to build a universe that would power Zeep's world, which only exists to power Rick's car. 3 generations of absent fathers and enslaved civilizations. Also, Rick can charge his phone. The show doesn't dwell on it. Nobody comforts Kyle. Rick and Zeep immediately go back to their universe measuring contest. Kyle's dead father and missed funeral are just collateral damage in the infinite regression of exploitation. Very normal stuff. Here's another detail from the same episode. So, Rick's been gone for a while. He's been in Galactic Federation prison, the family's been living under alien occupation, and the house has been transformed by the new regime. Beth's working as a horse surgeon for aliens, Jerry's got some weird corporate job he doesn't understand, and they've all been trying to move on without Rick. But if you look carefully at the backgrounds throughout the episode, the interdimensional cable box is still there, just sitting in the living room. That weird device Rick installed back in Season 1 that lets them watch TV from every dimension in the multiverse. Nobody removed it, nobody unplugged it, it's just part of the furniture now. Think about what that means. Rick abandoned them, got arrested, completely upended their lives, and they still couldn't bring themselves to get rid of his stuff. The cable box sits there like a shrine to someone who left them behind. Or maybe it's more like a scar they can't remove. Either way, it's disturbing. Even when Rick's not physically present, his technology stays embedded in their home. His influence is so deep it's literally wired into their walls. The aliens took over Earth, restructured society, installed a puppet government, but nobody thought to remove Rick's interdimensional cable box. It's a constant reminder that Rick's presence in their lives isn't something they can just undo. Even when he's gone, he's still there. His modifications to their reality are permanent. The family can't go back to what they were before Rick showed up, because he's already changed the fundamental infrastructure of their existence. Now let's move to a new episode, the Rickchurian Morty date. So Rick and the president are having their massive fight throughout the White House. They're destroying the Oval Office, battling through corridors, and the president is showing Rick all the secret presidential locations he shouldn't know about. During this sequence, if you freeze frame and look carefully at the background details in the White House basement, there's a tiny diorama of the Twin Towers burning on 9/11, just sitting there, a little model of one of America's worst tragedies in the White House basement, like it's a souvenir or a trophy or evidence of something the government wants kept out of sight. The show doesn't draw attention to it, no character mentions it. It's just there in the background while Rick and the president are trying to kill each other, which makes it even more disturbing because it suggests this isn't even the weirdest thing in that basement. It's just one item among many dark government secrets. Combined with Rick's immediate reaction to 9/11 back in Season 3's premiere, where he instantly understood it would be used to strip away freedoms, this diorama takes on an even more sinister tone. The government has a model of the burning towers. Why? What does that represent? A reminder? A commemoration? Evidence of foreknowledge? The show drops it there and moves on, leaving you to wonder what the hell the implication is supposed to be. And that's somehow more unsettling than if they'd made it a whole plot point. Back to another detail from the Rickchurian Morty date. During the massive fight between Rick and the president throughout the White House, they crash through various secret basement areas. In the chaos, Rick collides with and destroys a moonlander, and then the camera reveals a full film set of the moon landing. Complete lighting equipment, fake lunar surface, the whole production setup, just sitting there in a government storage facility beneath the most powerful building in America. The show's playing directly into one of the most persistent conspiracy theories in American history. 969 moon landing was faked and filmed on a soundstage. Except here, the evidence is just casually stored in the White House basement, alongside all the other dark secrets. JFK's blood-stained car is there too. A mock-up of the World Trade Center. A UFO labeled Churchill 02. All the conspiracy theories, just sitting in storage. What makes this particularly disturbing is how casually it's treated. This isn't presented as some shocking revelation, it's just background debris during a fight scene. The implication is that, yes, the government has props from the moon landing, filming, and that's actually one of the least interesting things they're hiding down there. The show never confirms or denies whether this means the landing was actually faked. It just shows you the set exists and moves on, leaving you to draw your own conclusions about what that means, which is somehow more unsettling than if they'd made it explicit. Back to an earlier episode we discussed M. Night Shame Aliens, and remember to subscribe to the channel. So in this episode, there's a mailman who delivers mail to Jerry at his fake job inside the alien simulation. He's just a background character, part of the elaborate illusion the Zigarians create to trick Rick. Nothing particularly memorable about him. But here's the disturbing callback. In Season 3's The Whirly-Durly Conspiracy, if you watch the background carefully, that same mailman appears and gets killed by a giant falling mailbox. The show brings back this random character from a simulation 2 seasons earlier, just to kill him in the most ironically appropriate way possible. Think about what that means. Either this mailman was a real person that the Zigarians scanned and incorporated into their simulation, and he's been living his life for years, only to die in this absurdly poetic way. Or he somehow escaped the simulation and made it into the real world, only to meet this fate. Either way, the universe apparently decided that being a mailman meant he deserved to be crushed by the very thing he delivers. The show doesn't explain it, doesn't draw attention to it, just kills a minor character from Season 1 in a background gag that most viewers would never catch unless they were freeze-framing and comparing faces across seasons. It's the kind of detail that makes you wonder how many other simulation characters made it out into reality, and what other ironic deaths are waiting for them. Now let's move to a new episode, Ricksy Business. So, this is the Season 1 finale, where Rick throws the massive house party that destroys everything. But there's a B-plot running throughout, where Jerry and Beth are on their Titanic-themed getaway, which goes horribly wrong. Jerry's obsession with the Titanic movie is treated as a running joke. He knows all the details. He's excited about recreating specific scenes, and the whole trip is basically his fantasy vacation. But here's the subtle, disturbing detail. If you look at the background of the Smith House recreation room during this episode, there's a framed Titanic picture on the wall, just casually hanging there among the family photos and decorations. Already a bit odd for a grown man to have movie memorabilia displayed in his house like that. Fast forward to Season 3's The Whirly-Durly Conspiracy, after Beth and Jerry's divorce. Jerry's living alone in a depressing apartment, and if you look at the walls, that same Titanic picture is now hanging above his bed. He took it with him. When he moved out and had to decide what possessions mattered most, the Titanic picture made the cut. It's a small background detail that reveals something deeply sad about Jerry. His obsession with this movie about a doomed romance isn't just a quirky character trait. It's something he clings to even after his own marriage sinks. The picture follows him from his family home to his lonely apartment, a constant reminder of romanticized tragedy. Still in Ricksy Business, where Rick casually reveals he created a sentient being whose entire existence is constant psychological torture, and his main concern is that this failed experiment might ruin his party. When Aberdolf Linkler crashes the party, literally demolishing a wall, Rick explains, "Linkler is a crazed maniac, just a misguided effort of mine to create a morally neutral superleader by combining the DNA of Adolf Hitler and Abraham Lincoln." Linkler's response, "Rick, you brought me into this world, a suffering abomination tortured by the duality of its being. But I shall finally know peace when I watch the life drain from your wretched body." Think about that. Rick genetically engineered a person who is fundamentally incompatible with himself at the DNA level. Half of Linkler's brain wants to free slaves, while the other half wants to commit genocide. He's biologically designed to be in constant internal conflict. Every thought, every impulse contradicts itself. He describes his own existence as that of a suffering abomination. And Rick's assessment? It just adds up to a lame, weird loser. Later, Linkler sacrifices himself fighting a monster to save Morty and Nancy. His dying words express that he only wanted Rick's acceptance and love. When Morty tells Rick about Linkler's heroic death and final message, Rick's response is to cut up the crystals they retrieved and snort them to get high, then immediately start dancing. Rick created a sentient being, specifically programmed to suffer, dismissed him as a failure, and when that being died, trying to earn his creator's love, Rick used his sacrifice as an excuse to do alien cocaine. Linkler's existence raises the question, If you create life that you know will suffer just from existing, are you obligated to end that suffering? Rick's answer appears to be, not my problem. Moving to a new episode, close Rick counters of the Rick kind. So when the Council of Ricks shows up and takes Rick away, Jerry ends up bonding with Doofus Rick, the one Rick that all the other Ricks make fun of. They actually become friends because Doofus Rick is kind and treats Jerry like he matters. At one point, Jerry shows Doofus Rick his collection of commemorative R2D2 coins, clearly proud of them. Doofus Rick looks at these coins and says something that perfectly encapsulates Jerry's entire relationship with material possessions. They have value to you, not they're valuable or they're worth money, just that Jerry personally values them, which is a polite way of saying they're objectively worthless. And Jerry accepts this. He's spent money on collectible coins featuring a fictional robot from a movie franchise, fully aware on some level that they have no real monetary value. He's buying emotional comfort disguised as an investment. It's the adult equivalent of a security blanket, except it costs actual money and takes up space in his home. This detail reveals a pattern we see throughout the series. Jerry constantly tries to find external validation and meaning through purchases and possessions. The coins aren't valuable, but owning them makes him feel like he has something special, something that connects him to a larger cultural phenomenon. He's desperately trying to buy significance. The fact that only Doofus Rick, the dumb Rick, is kind enough to frame Jerry's worthless coins in a positive light makes it even sadder. Here's another chilling detail from the same episode. So, Rick and Morty get captured by the Council of Ricks and brought to the Citadel to investigate who's been murdering Ricks across dimensions. They discover evil Morty has been torturing Mortys inside a dome, using their combined brainwaves to hide his own genius brainwaves from detection. It's one of the most disturbing reveals in the entire series. Dozens of Mortys strapped to machines, screaming in agony, being used as living camouflage. But here's what most people miss. Rick looks at this setup and casually admits he'd thought of doing this exact thing before. He even provides technical specifications. .5 Mortys and a jumper cable would work for the same purpose. Not a shocked how could anyone think of this. Just a matter of fact acknowledgement that, yeah, he's considered torturing his grandson and other versions of his grandson to achieve the same goal. Think about what that means. At some point in Rick's past, he sat down and worked out the logistics of a Morty torture chamber. He calculated how many Mortys would be needed. He figured out the equipment required. He mapped out the entire process in his head, probably while Morty was sleeping upstairs or eating breakfast or playing video games, completely unaware his grandfather was mentally designing his torture device. Rick didn't do it, obviously, but the fact that he thought about it, worked out the details, and remembers those details well enough to recite them immediately, that's almost worse than if he'd just been horrified by evil Morty's creation. Here's another absolutely horrifying detail from the same episode. So, Rick gets sentenced by the Council of Ricks to the Machine of Unspeakable Doom, which sounds metal as hell, but is actually way worse than the name implies. And Rick, being Rick, immediately understands exactly how this thing works, and explains it in the most Rick way possible. The machine swaps your conscious and unconscious minds, which means your fantasies, your dreams, your happy thoughts, all the mental escape hatches your brain uses to cope with reality. Those become the things you can't access. They're running in the background now, just out of reach. You're aware they exist, but you can't experience them. Meanwhile, your conscious mind is stuck processing all the stuff your unconscious normally handles, which is basically psychological torture on its own. Oh, and also it stabs you in the balls every 10 seconds. Like, the Council of Ricks really sat down and designed the most psychologically devastating torture device possible, and then just for good measure, added regular genital trauma to keep things spicy. That's just the cherry on top of the nightmare sundae. The ball stabbing is the bonus torture. Think about that for a second. Well, 10 seconds. You're trapped in a mental hell where you can't escape into your own imagination, and every 10 seconds you get a reminder that, oh yeah, physical agony is also part of this package deal. It's like if Inception and a medieval torture chamber had a baby, and that baby really hated your testicles specifically, and this is considered standard legal punishment in the Citadel. Not even the worst thing they could do to you, just what they hand out for regular crimes, which really makes you wonder what their maximum security torture devices are like, because if ball-stabbing mind-swap machines are the baseline, I don't even want to know what they consider cruel and unusual. Let's talk about another detail from the Whirly-Durly conspiracy. So Jerry's living in this depressing motel after the divorce, and Summer shows up to give him a skull from her death cult. adventures, normal stuff. Very healthy family dynamic. She knocks on the door, and it's room 826, not room 1, not room 4202 obvious, not room 237, that's The Shining's number. Someone else already called dibs on the horror. Room 826. Now here's where it gets weird. August 26th? That's the date the first episode of Rick and Morty aired in some test markets. Or maybe it's 8/26, as in 8 squared is 64, 2 cubed is 8, 64 minus 8 equals 56. Okay, I'm reaching, but stay with me. Or, and this is the really depressing theory, maybe it's just the motel's way of saying, Jerry's existence is so forgettable they didn't even bother giving him a room number with any cultural weight to it. Like, even the universe is telling Jerry, you don't get to be in room 237 where something interesting happened. You don't even get room 101 from 1984. You get 826, which means nothing to anyone, just like your entire personality. The number itself is Jerry, perfectly functional, technically exists, but completely unremarkable in every possible way. Or maybe I'm overthinking this, and someone on the animation team just liked how the numbers looked next to each other. But if we've learned anything from this show, the meaningless details sometimes hurt the most. Also, there are apparently hookers outside, which Jerry somehow doesn't recognize as hookers, because, of course, he doesn't. There's this wild moment in the whirly-dirly conspiracy that most people completely miss because it happens so fast during the chaos of summer, turning herself into a monster. Beth is desperately trying to fix her daughter using Rick's Morphizer XE machine, because of course, Rick has a body modification device just lying around the house, very normal grandfather behavior. Beth's on hold with customer service, frantically pressing buttons, and then she hits one specific button on the side of the machine. 3 tiny humanoid figures come running out. Not projections, not holograms, actual small people who were apparently just living inside this machine. They burst out screaming, "We're free," which implies they weren't just storage or batteries or some sci-fi nonsense. They were conscious beings trapped inside a cosmetic surgery device, aware of their imprisonment, and they immediately recognize their escape for what it is. Think about the implications here. Rick built or acquired a machine that requires sentient creatures to live inside it to function. These aren't AI. They're actual living beings small enough to fit inside the mechanical components, presumably keeping the thing running from the inside like the world's worst tech support job. Except they can't quit. They can't leave. They're just stuck in there until someone accidentally presses the emergency release button while trying to unmonster their daughter. And nobody comments on it. Beth doesn't go, "Oh my god, were there people in there this whole time?" Morty doesn't freak out about the ethics of enslaving tiny workers inside your beauty machine. The 3 little guys just run away, and that's it. We never see them again. Nobody mentions them, and the Morphizer keeps working fine afterward, which suggests either there are backup prisoners in there, or the whole needing people inside thing was optional. And Rick just did it anyway because why not add some casual slavery to your garage equipment? This is peak Rick and Morty horror because it reveals that even Rick's most mundane inventions involve suffering that nobody acknowledges. These 3 beings were trapped inside a machine whose primary function is making teenage girls insecure about their appearances. They lived inside a device that exists because humans hate themselves enough to want to change their bodies. That's their entire existence, maintaining a vanity project while imprisoned in its circuitry. The show treats their escape as a throwaway sight gag. Ha, tiny people, classic comedy goldmine. But if you stop and think about it for more than 5 seconds, it's genuinely disturbing. How long were they in there? Did Rick put them there intentionally? Did they volunteer thinking it would be temporary? Do they have families? What do they eat in there? The Morphizer has been sitting in that garage through multiple seasons of adventures. These 3 tiny workers have been trapped inside it during every single episode we've watched, just quietly maintaining the internal mechanisms while the Smith family falls apart around them. And here's the really messed up part. The machine keeps working after they escape, which means either A, there are more prisoners still in there, and we only freed 3 of many, or B, they weren't actually necessary for the machine's operation, and Rick just kept them in there for no reason other than he could. Neither option is good. Both options suggest that Rick's relationship with sentient life is so completely fucked that he'll casually enslave small beings inside his beauty equipment, without even considering it worth mentioning. It's not a plot point. It's not important. They're just there, trapped, because that's how Rick builds things. The worst part is that this probably isn't even the most unethical thing in Rick's garage. The Morphizer is just one device sitting on one shelf, Imagine what's living inside the other machines. What's trapped in the portal gun? What sentient beings are powering his car battery? Oh wait, we know that one. It's an entire civilization that Rick enslaves for energy, but that's a whole different episode's worth of horror. The three tiny workers running away free is supposed to be a happy moment for them, right? They escaped, except now what? They're tiny people in a regular-sized house in suburban America. Where do they go? What do they eat? How do they survive? Did Beth and Morty just accidentally doom them to death by exposure because at least inside the morphizer they had shelter and presumably some kind of life support? Their freedom might actually be a death sentence, which makes their excited, "We're free" even more tragic in retrospect. This is the show in a nutshell. Bury something genuinely horrifying in the background of a comedy scene about Summer's body image issues. Never explain it, never address it, and move on, like nothing happened. Those three tiny people lived in a machine for who knows how long, and the only reason they escaped is because Beth accidentally hit the right button while panicking about her daughter looking like a monster. Their entire liberation was an accident. Nobody was coming to save them. If Summer hadn't morphed herself, they'd still be in there right now, maintaining a device that nobody's using, imprisoned indefinitely for no reason. And that's assuming they survived their escape, which honestly, given their size and location, probably didn't happen. They most likely got eaten by a bird or stepped on within hours. So really, Beth accidentally killed three tiny enslaved beings while trying to fix her daughter. Just another Tuesday at the Smith house, where even the acts of compassion lead to casual genocide. Welcome to Rick's Garage, where the equipment runs on suffering and nobody cares enough to ask questions. Now let's move to a new episode, Summer of All Fears. Rick puts Summer and Morty in a punishment matrix for stealing his phone charger, then falls asleep and forgets about them for 17 matrix years. When they escape, Summer's an accomplished CEO and Morty's got PTSD from dead friends he can't stop talking about. Here's the messed up part. Summer conquered the Matrix, took over a country called Chargeria, and deliberately manufactured a fake war to mine lithium for wireless charging technology. The villain? Osama bin Chargin, because this Matrix runs on phone charger puns. But Summer needed an unkillable soldier. Enter Morty, who she knew couldn't permanently die in the Matrix. She let him get sent to prison, join the military, then threw him into combat, knowing he'd die repeatedly and keep coming back. The episode shows this in a genuinely horrifying montage. Morty gets shot, explodes, revives in a pile of bodies, gets blown up again. Each time he wakes up screaming, processes he's alive, then immediately goes back to combat, like respawning in Call of Duty except the trauma stacks. Summer watched it happen on screens in her command center. She saw Morty bond with CJ, Chop Block, Marmaduke, and 8-Ball. Watched them die. Watched Morty hold CJ while he bled out looking at a picture of a charging cable. She let it keep happening because she needed the lithium. This is Ender's Game meets your sibling being a complete sociopath. Summer went full Rick, saw a problem, identified an asset, unkillable brother, exploited it without considering the cost. She admits Morty was her greatest asset and darkest shame. Corporate speak for, "I knowingly traumatized my brother for minerals." The war was completely manufactured. Osama bin Chargin wasn't real. Summer created the entire conflict to justify resource extraction. She's playing Civilization, except the units are her actual brother dying repeatedly. When they escape, Morty immediately steals Rick's death race car and drives toward a nuclear power plant to destroy America's electrical grid. If he can't have CJ back, nobody gets to charge their phones. And the really dark part? Summer actively engineered his suffering, had his phones bugged, put tracking chips in his spine. Even the birds he fed were government spy cameras. She turned his entire simulation life into a surveillance state, while using him as an immortal super soldier in her fake war. When Summer finally admits this while Morty's about to blow up the power plant, she's crying but also kind of proud. Without you and your friends, we never would have escaped. That's next level gaslighting. Sorry I made you watch your friends die in a war I invented, but check out my escape plan. And Summer didn't need to do any of this. Rick was gonna wake up eventually, but she chose the path that maximized her success and Morty's trauma. Full Rick Sanchez energy. The episode ends with memory wipes. Summer records a video, trying to preserve her adult empathy and warn her younger self. Future Summer immediately deletes it without watching. All that awareness about the war crime she committed in a simulation, gone. She learned nothing. Given the choice to remember being that person or forget and stay innocent, she chose forget. That might be the most disturbing part. Not that Summer turned her brother into an immortal soldier in a fake war, but that she chose not to remember being capable of it. Now, let's move to a new episode, Rick, a mort well lived. Terrorists take over Blips and Chits Arcade, the power goes out, and the Roy game restarts with Morty still jacked in. His consciousness gets shattered across every single NPC in the game, literally split into 5 billion fragments. Rick jacks in as Roy and spends 50 years of game time trying to convince every piece to leave before the game ends, and Morty dies for real. Here's the disturbing part. Each NPC is 1/5 billionth of Morty with complete lives, memories, and families. Rick's basically telling an entire civilization they're fake and need to delete themselves to become a teenager again. Some fragments refuse. The president character knows Rick is real but won't leave, asking, "What happens to that part of us when we're all back together? One Morty? Indivisible?" It's a genuine question the episode never answers. When you merge 5 billion consciousnesses that spent 50 years developing separate opinions about Rick, do the dissenting parts just get erased? Does Morty remember being the president who hated Rick? Does he remember being Marta, who watched her video game father die and chose to stay because fragmented life felt more real? Some fragments actually choose death over rejoining. At the end, one fragment stays behind in the broken Roy machine, alone in a simulation forever, cataloged like arcade equipment. Morty gets reassembled, and he's just fine. No psychological damage from existing as 5 billion separate people for decades. That should be catastrophic trauma, but the show brushes it aside completely, which is somehow more disturbing than showing him damaged. Now let's move to a new episode, Forgetting Sarek Morchel. Rick gets mad at Morty for spilling portal fluid and violating sidekick rules, so he literally spins a wheel of better things than Morty he's apparently been saving for this exact moment. It lands on 2 crows. Rick fires Morty on the spot and replaces him with 2 actual crows. This isn't a temporary joke. Rick spends the entire episode adventuring with these birds, teaching them to retrieve artifacts and follow commands. He gives them bird quaaludes as rewards. He's genuinely having a better time with crows than he ever did with his grandson, which says something horrifying about how Rick views Morty's value. The really disturbing part comes at the end. After everything gets resolved and Morty's hand gets fixed, you expect Rick to admit the crows were a joke. Instead, Rick says he's leaving with them permanently. "I will never be the same," he tells Morty. "I'm a bad partner because I never made you a true partner. The crows made me see that." He gives Morty his portal gun and walks away, claiming he's kinda obsessed with crows now. The episode ends with Rick flying off with his new bird sidekicks, genuinely planning to abandon his grandson for birds because they taught him more about empathy in one adventure than Morty did in their entire relationship. The show treats this like character growth for Rick, but it's actually devastating. Rick's demonstrating that Morty is so replaceable that even literal birds make better companions, and he's willing to permanently leave his family for them. Now let's move to a new episode, Mortyplicity. Rick made decoys of his family to protect them from enemies, but the decoys didn't know they were decoys. And when those decoys started making their own decoys, things got weird, really weird. Enter the Glockenspiel family, wooden versions of the Smiths who pop out of a ceiling to save another family from Scarecrow Rick, a leather-skinned monster who's been harvesting skin from other decoys. The Glockenspiel Rick has a cuckoo clock bird that shoots out of his hand to kill people. They're made of wood, they're clearly lower quality copies, and they're completely sentient, with full emotions and awareness. Rick explains it himself. You get far enough down the decoy line and shit starts to get weird. You ever make a copy of a copy? The episode shows Lego Ricks, Stone Ricks, Puppet Ricks, Straw Families, Robot Ricks. Each generation of decoys gets progressively more degraded, like VHS tapes copied too many times, but they're all still conscious, all still capable of fear, hope, and suffering. Scarecrow Rick, the leather-skinned nightmare, actually says it explicitly. Ricks, they get lazy. There's always a shitty decoy towards the end, but those decoys made decoys too, and got lazy themselves. And far enough down the line, there be monsters. He knows he's a monster, he knows he was made badly, and he's conscious enough to be bitter about it, harvesting skin from better-made decoys to look more normal. The Glockenspiel family tries to build a sanctuary for all decoys, regardless of quality. They're the moral center of the episode, the ones trying to stop the violence, and they're made of wood. And subscribe to our channel if you're enjoying the video so far. The truly horrifying part of Mortyplicity is that every single one genuinely believes they're the original family until they discover otherwise. Summer keeps asking, "How do you know we're not decoys?" and Rick explains, they wouldn't be very good decoys if they did know they're decoys. Each family has complete memories, personalities, relationships. They remember Rick returning to the family. They remember past adventures. They have inside jokes and grudges. They're functionally identical to the real Smiths in every way that matters. When one Rick finds a chip in his brain labeled decoy firmware 5-6 you're a decoy, he just sighs, defeated. His entire existence, every memory and feeling, was real to him right up until that moment. Then it all became meaningless. The episode shows countless families dying. Each one fights desperately to survive because they genuinely believe their lives matter, that they're the real Smiths. When two Rick families meet, both immediately assume the other is the decoy and start fighting. Neither can accept they might be fake. Both are willing to kill to prove they're real. There's even a massive battle where dozens of decoy families slaughter each other, all convinced they're defending their legitimate existence. The episode treats this as dark comedy, but it's actually depicting mass murder, where every victim dies, believing their life had meaning, only for the audience to know they were always disposable copies. The final twist? Even the family we've been following might be decoys. We never get confirmation they're real, which means everything we watched might have been fake people dying for nothing. Now let's move to a new episode, Rick Murai Jack. The episode finally reveals Rick's backstory through a brain scan. After another Rick murdered his wife Diane and daughter Beth, Rick C-137 spent years hunting across the multiverse for the killer, but he never found him. So Rick started killing every Rick he encountered, hoping one would be his target. The montage shows Rick traveling dimension to dimension, executing alternate versions of himself. He's just killing on sight. Rick after Rick after Rick, bodies piling up as he descends into alcoholism and depression. He became so prolific at murdering Ricks that the other Ricks had to band together and form the Council of Ricks specifically to stop him. Think about that. Rick was hunting one murderer, but became a serial killer himself, slaughtering potentially thousands of his alternate selves. He never found his target Rick, which means every single Rick he killed was innocent of the crime he was avenging. He became exactly what he hated, someone who kills Ricks and destroys families. The episode even shows hostile Ricks attacking Cone 37 Rick in his home universe, which he kills left and right. He's so dangerous that other Ricks form an entire interdimensional government just to contain him. The monster he was hunting had killed 2 people. Rick killed countless versions of himself and traumatized countless families in his revenge quest. He became worse than his target ever was. The episode's climax reveals evil Morty's plan to escape the central finite curve, 2C, the sealed-off section of infinity, where Rick is always the smartest man. To break through, he needs massive amounts of energy. His solution? Use every Rick and Morty in the Citadel as fuel. Evil Morty hacks the Citadel's portal system, making every portal lead to death. Ricks trying to escape get blended, incinerated, torn apart by tentacles, shot by machine guns on the other end. The episode shows the Citadel descending into chaos as thousands die trying to flee. But the really horrifying part is Operation Phoenix, TP, the Citadel's resurrection system. Ricks and Mortys who die are supposed to wake up in new clone bodies. Evil Morty hacks this system too. Instead of revival tanks, they wake up in blenders. The computer voice keeps saying, rerouted, as Rick after Rick, Morty after Morty, opens their eyes in a vat with spinning blades at the bottom, just before being liquefied. Their blood powers the dimensional drive beam that tears open the curve. Evil Morty literally turned the Citadel's resurrection system into a battery powered by grinding its citizens into fuel. Every Rick and Morty who died, believing they'd come back instead, wakes up for one horrified second before being pureed. The Citadel housed thousands, possibly millions. Evil Morty's plan required killing nearly all of them, and he admits it calmly. I was afraid I'd have to kill every Rick on the Citadel to get what I needed. He was fully prepared to genocide the entire population for his escape. Now let's move to a new episode, Solarix. After Mr. Frundles infects their entire Earth, turning everything into copies of itself by biting things, the family escapes and finds a new timeline where alternate versions of themselves conveniently died of natural causes. They proceed to bury these bodies in the backyard. Jerry groans, "Oh, God," while digging. Beth asks, "And you swear they die of natural causes?" Rick confirms, yep, and admits it was a bit of a rush job, actually. Space Beth questions if the new timeline is the exact same as our old timeline. Even my stuff? Rick casually responds that the dead versions say Parmesan weird. The disturbing part isn't just that they're burying themselves, It's how routine this has become. They've clearly done this before. Self-burial is just standard procedure when switching timelines now. Jerry's still somewhat grossed out, but everyone else treats it like chores. They're literally digging graves for their own corpses while discussing pronunciation differences. Rick even gets defensive. I could have left you guys. You think the concept of family matters to me? I'm not even your Rick. As if burying their alternate selves and stealing their lives is somehow doing them a favor. The family's biggest concern isn't the existential horror of replacing dead versions of themselves. It's that they say parmesan instead of parmesan. Summer says boo. Jerry says Jesus Christ. Then they all just go inside like nothing happened. They're completely desensitized to the act of literally burying themselves and taking over dead people's lives. Now, let's look at another disturbing detail from Solarix. The episode reveals that after losing his wife Diane and daughter Beth, Rick Cone 37 kept his entire home dimension trapped in a time loop. Not just his house, the entire dimension. Everyone living in that universe has been reliving the same day over and over for decades. The day Rick's family was murdered. Mr. Goldman Bach-Majorian, Rick's elderly neighbor, has been trapped in this loop the entire time. He's found notes written by himself explaining, "My mind is held captive in a time loop, trapped in the day of a traumatic event by the agony of a formidable intelligence, but also that my captor forgot about aging, that my body spoils and yearns for death while my soul remains stuck in place, caught like a fly in amber." The loop accounts for mental resets but not physical aging. So Mr. Goldman Bach-Majorian has aged into an ancient, decrepit man while his mind keeps resetting, unable to understand why he's so old. He writes himself notes from the trash, trying to figure out what's happening to him. Every day, he rediscovers he's trapped. Every day, he pities the poor weirdo who wrote the notes, not realizing it's him. Rick encounters him, and Mr. Goldman Bach-Majorian mentions wishing the note writer could let go and move on. Rick finally shuts the loop down. We hear, "Ah, sweet death," as Mr. Goldman Bach-Majorian. Goldman Bach-Majorian is released from decades of imprisonment. Rick built this as a haunted shrine to his grief, keeping an entire dimension's population trapped in his worst day, just so he could wallow in it. The wiki calls it his personal hell, but it's everyone else's hell too. They just don't remember it. Here's another disturbing detail from Night Family that the wiki confirms. When the Night Family takes control and enslaves the Day Family, they don't just force them to work. They start systematically erasing day culture. Beth is shown burning DVDs of movies with day in their titles. Independence Day, Groundhog Day, and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. But she spares Talladega Nights. This isn't just petty revenge or random destruction, it's ideological cleansing. The Night Family is literally burning media that celebrates or references daytime, while preserving anything with night in the title. They're rewriting culture to erase the Day Family's existence and values. Think about what that means. They're trying to erase them culturally and historically. Burning books and movies is what authoritarian regimes do when they want to control the narrative. The Night Family went from, "please rinse your dishes," to full-blown cultural genocide in the span of days. And it's treated as a throwaway visual gag. Just Beth casually burning DVDs in the background while the Night Family watches Night at the museum on TV. The show presents systematic cultural erasure as comedy, which makes it even more unsettling when you think about what it represents. The Night Family wanted dominance and the complete erasure of day culture, over dishes not being rinsed. Now let's move to a new episode, Night Family. Rick creates a device called the Somnambulator that programs people's unconscious bodies to do tasks while they sleep. The family starts using it for various things, learning Spanish, getting abs, starting podcasts. But then things escalate when Rick refuses Night Summer's request to rinse dishes after eating. The Night Family rebels. Night Summer declares, "I have always been here, Rick, deep inside the mind of your grandchild, waiting to come out. Your machine allowed me to steal the night, and soon I will seize the day." They strip the house, lock the Day Family out of the garage, and eventually enslave them. Night Summer forces them to work constantly. Work, work. The function of the Day Manoid is to serve the night. Work, harder, harder. She even justifies it. It is natural for the day to serve the night. Night was here long before day. Half of all time is nighttime. The disturbing implication is that the Day Family was essentially enslaving their unconscious selves, making them do chores, exercise, learn skills, all without consent or compensation. The night versions were sentient the whole time, just trapped and forced to serve. When they finally gain control through Night Summer's leadership, they immediately implement the same oppression in reverse. Rick later admits the Knight family spent all the Day family's money on vacations, renting concert halls, and night-centric streaming subscriptions once they seized control. They literally bankrupted them. The episode ends with both sides exhausted from fighting, having ruined everything. Now let's move to a new episode, the Vat of Acid episode. When Morty pitches his save point device idea, where you could save a moment in time and reset back to it like in a video game, Rick immediately shoots it down by saying he saw it on Futurama. Later in the episode, there's a visual reference to The Simpsons, when a bar resembling Moe's Tavern appears in the background while Morty's using the device. Both Futurama and The Simpsons are matte graining shows. Rick is essentially dismissing Morty's idea by pointing out it's already been done by the same creator's other properties. But the episode itself contains a Simpsons reference, while Rick claims he doesn't do ideas from Futurama. The meta-commentary gets even better when you realize Rick later says, "If Ant-Man and the Wasp can do it, I'm not interested," about time travel. The writer of this Rick and Morty episode, Jeff Loveness, went on to write the 2023 sequel to Ant-Man and the Wasp. So Rick is dismissing the very franchise that his episode's writer would later work on. Rick and Morty is calling out other shows for doing certain plots while simultaneously doing those same plots and referencing those same shows. It's the show being self-aware about story borrowing while doing exactly what Rick claims to avoid. The episode says, "We don't steal ideas from Futurama," while literally showing you visual references to The Simpsons, acknowledging that all sci-fi shows borrow from each other, including themselves. Now let's move to a new episode, Childrick of Mort. The episode begins with Rick trying to avoid a call from someone claiming to be pregnant with his children. The family forces him to deal with it, and they discover the mother is Gaia, a living planet Rick had sex with. Rick and Beth work together, building an entire civilization for what they believe are Rick's children, and they genuinely bond over the project. Then God shows up, literally, a Zeus-like being, who reveals he's actually the father. Rick gets furious. Guy swoops in after we raised his whole civilization and tells us he forgives us. What a bleep mooch. When Gaia tells Rick to leave, he refuses. Bull. Bleep. They're my kids. We're staying. Even after learning, they're not biologically his. Rick fights God himself to keep the civilization. He tells Gaia, "Father or not, he was a lying piece of bleep. I don't care who else stuffed your crust, but I'm the guy that showed up." This is huge. Rick, who constantly abandons things and people, is now claiming children that aren't even his and fighting God to stay with them. He's defining fatherhood not by biology, but by who showed up and did the work. It's the exact opposite of how he treated Beth. The episode shows Rick capable of commitment and genuine parenting, just not with his actual family. He bonded with Beth over building this civilization in a way they never bonded before, but instead of using that as a foundation to improve their real relationship, he wanted to stay with the fake one. It's easier to be a good parent to strangers than fix things with the family you actually hurt. Now let's move to the Season 4 finale, Star Mort Rickturn of the Jerry. The episode revolves around Space Beth returning to Earth, having discovered a bomb in her neck. Rick had made a clone of Beth when she couldn't decide whether to stay with her family or go to space, so he made both choices happen, with one Beth being real and one being a clone. He put a bomb in the clone's neck so she'd never return. When both Beths confront him about who's real, Rick reveals he has a memory vial containing the truth, but both Beths reject it. The truth is, we have more important shit to do, like raise our kids and stamp out the Federation, neither of which seem like they want anything to do with you. Then Beth makes one final request. "For once in my life, I want you to decide, Dad. Do you want me to stay here and be part of your life, or do you want me to leave?" Rick's response, he does a switcheroo with the memory vial while saying, "Hup, ho, big money, eyes on the lady, switcheroo, which one's which?" He clicks off the projector and says, "Holy shit, I'm a terrible father." Rick literally shuffles or destroys the labels, so he can't know which Beth is real and which is the clone. When finally forced to make a choice, to take responsibility for which daughter stays, he removes his own ability to choose. He'd rather condemn one Beth to potentially being fake and living with that uncertainty than decide which daughter he wants. Both Beths now have to live not knowing if they're the real Beth or the clone. One of them is genuinely a copy, living a fake existence, and Rick chose to make it impossible to ever know the truth, rather than make a decision and face the consequences. It's the ultimate act of cowardice disguised as love. Now let's move to Rick Dependent Spray, which features one of the show's most disturbing endings. After Morty accidentally creates giant monster sperm using equipment from his mom's horse hospital, The president tries to stop them by luring them with a giant human egg, which turns out to be Summers. Morty desperately warns, "Don't let them reach my sister's egg, Mr. President. You'll be making a giant incest baby." Despite their efforts, one sperm, DK, Sticky, the one Morty befriended, reaches the egg. The president decides to launch the resulting baby into space. It's space's problem now. The post-credits scene reveals the baby is fully conscious. An astronaut floats in space, monologuing about abandoning his family. "I tried to be a parent, I really did, but I've come to find I'm only suited to be a spaceman. The nicest part of being up here is there are no reminders of the guilt I sometimes feel about abandoning my family." Then he hears baby sounds, goo goo gaga. The giant incest baby appears, and the astronaut realizes what it is. "Dear God, no, you can't be real," he screams, "my conscience," before the baby presumably kills him. The baby isn't just alive, it's aware enough to seek out this specific astronaut, someone guilty of abandoning his family. It's literally hunting people based on guilt, functioning as living cosmic punishment for parental abandonment. Earth created a sentient being from an incestuous union and immediately abandoned it to space. Now it's out there, conscious, aware of what it is, and apparently capable of recognizing and targeting people with similar guilt. Moving on to Claw and Hoarder, Special Victims Morty. Just a reminder to subscribe to our channel. Remember when Morty just wanted a dragon, and the show was like, "Sure, but we're making it weird"? The episode plays out like someone's D&D campaign after everyone got way too drunk. Morty gets his dragon, the dragon disappears, and then Morty finds Rick and Balthramah soul bonding together. The show makes it crystal clear this is sexual. There's moaning, suggestive sounds, and when they're caught mid-bond, Rick literally asks why it feels better now that Morty's watching, which is very weird. A dragon council shows up and starts screaming, "Slut dragon" at Balthramah. Not once, not twice, like 50 times. There's a wizard character who whips the dragon while yelling variations of "you slut" over and over. And because Rick's soul bonded, he feels every hit. The show's basically doing BDSM, but making it everyone else's problem. Then they meet more slut dragons living in caves, because of course, and there's this character called Shadowjacker who announces he's been masturbating while listening to them. His solution to their problem? A 10-slut soul orgy to become the all-slut phoenix dragon. Yes, that's a real line from the show. The episode shows everyone moaning during this orgy. Rick's so desperate to escape the experience that he tries to ice spell himself, not to stop participating, but to die faster. When the spell backfires and makes it last longer instead, he screams about how he could have died quickly. That's how bad it was. After it's over, Morty straight up tells Balthramah he's grossed out by how sexual everything got. The episode presents soul bonding as inherently sexual and traumatizes everyone who participates. Let's talk about Morty Night Run. Morty saves a telepathic cloud named Fart from an assassin and spends the episode protecting him from government forces. They bond. Fart sings him a song about the cosmos and unity. Morty genuinely cares about this thing, which is wild considering it's literally a sentient fart that can turn oxygen into gold, but go with it. Then they reach the wormhole home. Fart's about to leave when he drops the truth bomb. His species views all carbon-based life as a disease that needs to be cured. He's going back to tell the others where Earth is so they can come cleanse it. Morty realizes he just helped Genocide get directions to his house. So, Morty asks Fart to sing for him one more time. Fart starts singing Goodbye Moonmen again, all emotional and trusting. Mid-song, Morty shoots him with the antimatter gun. Fart asks, "Morty, why? Why?" And Morty just keeps shooting until there's nothing left. This wasn't self-defense. This wasn't an accident. Morty deliberately asked Fart to sing so he'd be distracted and vulnerable, then executed him while he was performing. That's premeditation. That's cold-blooded murder. The episode shows Morty crying afterward, but he still did it. Up until this point, Morty had killed things in panic or self-defense. This is different. He tricked someone who trusted him into dropping their guard, then killed them to prevent a hypothetical future threat. Very Minority Report. Except instead of Tom Cruise doing parkour, it's a traumatized 4-year-old shooting his friend mid-ballad. The episode ends with Morty looking completely detached and anguished. Rick makes fart jokes, completely missing that his grandson just crossed a line he can't uncross. Let's talk about the Ricklantis mix-up. This episode pulls a bait and switch where Rick and Morty go to Atlantis, while we actually follow life on the rebuilt Citadel. And it gets genuinely bleak. Simple Rick has his happiest memory, his daughter's birthday, harvested for wafer cookies. The memory plays on loop through his brain, while machinery collects the happy chemicals. When factory worker Rick J22 takes him hostage, he actually frees Simple Rick from the machine. Rick J22 demands a portal gun and his freedom. The factory owner shows up and tells him, whatever time you were going to make him serve, he served it. It ends now. Come with me, friend. Rick J22 walks out through the factory, crying tears of joy as his co-workers cheer him on. The owner walks him outside to a fancy hover convertible and hands him the keys. Then he shoots Rick J22 in the back of the head. The next scene shows Rick J22 now hooked into the Simple Rick machine, with the narrator explaining they captured his taste of real freedom to sell in new Freedom Wafer Selects. The system literally weaponized his moment of escape. His one genuine taste of freedom became the product. Then there's the wishing portal. 4 Morty friends find this legendary portal, where your wishes come true if you sacrifice something important. Fat Morty throws in his panini maker, and wishes for 1,000,000 sandwiches. Lizard Morty tosses his surfer necklace. Glasses Morty throws in a candy bar. But Slick Morty realizes none of their wishes will come true, so he wishes that anything about this life would change, and throws himself into the portal. Right after Slick falls to his death, a PA system announces, "Garbage dump, stand back," and industrial pipes dump tons of trash into the portal. The whole thing was just the Citadel's garbage chute. They've been throwing kids' dreams and sacrifices into literal trash disposal. But here's where it gets weird. When the 3 surviving Mortys return to school, their teacher tells them there's no graduation, and the curriculum is changing. The entire school system has been restructured. Lizard Morty realizes Slick's wish came true. So the portal was fake, just a garbage dump where the Citadel disposes of broken Mortys and trash. But Slick's wish still somehow worked. His death actually changed something about the Citadel. The show never explains how or why, which makes it more unsettling. Did killing himself in a garbage chute somehow matter, or was it all just coincidence? Moving on to autoerotic assimilation. So Unity dumps Rick via breakup notes scattered across an entire planet, because apparently, we need to talk. Texts are too mainstream. And Rick goes back to the garage to do what any healthy adult does after a breakup, build a suicide device from scratch. And here's where it gets really messed up. Rick doesn't have some pre-built break glass in case of existential crisis machine sitting in storage. He assembles this thing in real time, which means he just knows how to construct a death ray, the way normal people know how to make grilled cheese. He grabs 2 energy bulbs, puts together a metal contraption, then pulls out a frozen alien from his drawer like he's meal prepping. But wait, there's more. This is starting to sound like a really dark infomercial. Rick revives the alien with chemicals, sticks it under his new device, and vaporizes it. The creature literally shrieks before getting disintegrated. Rick's out here beta testing his suicide method on a living being, like he's QA checking an iPhone app. So, yeah, Rick built a killing machine, verified it works by murdering an alien, then calmly positioned his own head under it. This isn't a cry for help. This is engineering at its most depressing. The man calculated the exact components needed, assembled them without instructions, and ran a successful trial before the main event. The only reason Rick survives is because he passes out drunk right before the blast fires. Dude literally got saved by his own alcoholism, which is like getting rescued from drowning by your own vomit. Technically it worked, but the mechanics are horrifying. The show plays chaos in the background, while Jerry happily weeds the garden the next morning, completely oblivious to the fact that Rick spent the night slumped over a homemade execution device. Nobody checks on him. Nobody notices. Rick just sits there until sunrise like the world's most depressing lawn ornament. Moving on to Get Swifty. A giant floating head shows up and announces Earth is now competing in Planet Music, an intergalactic talent competition where losing planets get vaporized by plasma ray. Think American Idol, except the losers don't go home embarrassed. They get their entire civilization atomized. The Cromulon lays out the rules. 24 hours, 5 planets, 5 songs. But in the end, there can only be one. All participation is involuntary. Disqualified and losing planets are disintegrated. Real casual about the genocide, and we watch it happen. The Greeby Bobes from Planet Parblesnops give a speech about artistic freedom instead of performing. The Cromulon immediately says, disqualified, and fires the plasma ray, blowing up the entire planet. Billions dead because their musician prioritized philosophy over entertainment. The really messed up part? This show has been running for 988 seasons. The Cromulons have been destroying civilizations for their entertainment since before human history began. Thousands of planets have been genocided for reality TV ratings. Earth's survival comes down to Rick improvising get swifty lyrics. Take off your pants and your panties, shit on the floor, while drunk. 8 billion lives depending on whether one alcoholic scientist can freestyle a decent hook under pressure. Ice-T literally sacrifices himself, crumbling apart from the plasma ray so Rick can finish performing. The fate of humanity hinges on Rick clapping over his head while singing, head bent over, raised up posterior, until the judges are satisfied. Earth wins, and the Cromulons just leave, ending their show after nearly 1,000 seasons of planetary genocide. All those civilizations died, so these cosmic beings could find the one performance that finally satisfied them. Moving on to 60 minutes. Rick installs interdimensional cable and gives the family special goggles that let them view parallel timelines through genetically matching versions of their eyes. Basically, they can watch what their lives would have been like if they'd made different choices. This goes about as well as you'd expect. Jerry immediately jumps in and sees himself doing cocaine with Johnny Depp. Beth finds herself as a Nobel Prize-winning human surgeon instead of a horse surgeon. Every version where they achieved their dreams has one thing in common. Summer was never born. When two people pursue their ambitions, apparently having kids doesn't factor into the equation. Summer realizes she's the reason her parents gave up everything, which sends her into an existential spiral about being an unwanted pregnancy. Meanwhile, Jerry and Beth start arguing about who held whom back. Jerry points out that, without kids, Beth would be drinking wine alone in a house full of exotic birds, while he'd be on DiCaprio's yacht, banging Kristen Stewart. The really dark part comes when they find a timeline where Jerry confesses he wishes Beth hadn't gotten the abortion, which reveals they seriously considered it. Summer's standing right there when this comes out. So yeah, the goggles show them exactly what they sacrificed by having children, complete with all the success and freedom they could have had. Beth becomes a celebrated surgeon, Jerry becomes a movie star, and neither of them have the family dragging them down. The episode plants these seeds of resentment that never fully go away, just get buried under the reality that they're stuck with each other now. Moving on to the ABCs of Beth. The episode ends with Rick offering Beth a choice that's basically Sophie's choice, except instead of choosing which kid lives, she's choosing whether she wants to exist at all. Option 1, stay with her family and keep being a horse surgeon in suburban mediocrity. Option 2, Rick makes a clone to replace her, while the real Beth travels the cosmos pursuing her actual dreams. Beth makes her decision off-screen. We never learn which option she chose. The wiki explicitly confirms this was intentional. Whether or not Beth accepted Rick's offer to clone her so she could pursue her own interests is deliberately left ambiguous. The only hint is that when Summer and Morty come home, Beth suddenly acts way more parental than usual, which could mean she chose to stay and is trying harder, or it could mean she's a freshly programmed clone doing what she's been designed to do. So, for the rest of the series, we genuinely don't know if we're watching the original Beth who sacrificed her dreams to be a good mom, or a clone programmed to think she made that sacrifice, while the real Beth is out there somewhere finally living for herself. The show just leaves this question hanging in the air, like Rick's suicide device over his head. Either Beth gave up everything she wanted to raise kids who routinely tell her she's a bad parent, or a manufactured copy is doing it, while the real Beth abandoned everyone without a second thought. Both options are equally soul-crushing, and the show refuses to tell us which nightmare we're living in. Still, in the ABCs of Beth, we discover what happened to Beth's childhood friend Tommy, who she trapped in Fruppyland 30 years ago out of jealousy. Tommy survived by having sex with the Fruppy creatures Rick designed, creating human-Fruppy hybrid offspring, then eating whichever children looked most appetizing while the rest worshipped him as a god. Because apparently when you're trapped in a magical dimension with no food, incestuous cannibalism is just good resource management. But here's the really disturbing part. Tommy's hybrid children are intelligent enough to stage theatrical productions about their own origin story. They've developed medieval-level civilization, complete with performance arts, all centered around Daddy Dearest, who literally consumes his less favored offspring for protein. The play depicts Beth pushing Tommy into honey, her way of dismissing the historical accuracy as fake news, and presumably explains the whole "our father creates us through incest and then eats some of us" situation. These kids have processed their trauma enough to turn it into entertainment for their God King father. That's either the most advanced coping mechanism ever invented, or the most disturbing theater company in the multiverse. Rick even sarcastically calls the play Certified Fresh, a Rotten Tomatoes reference, because nothing says quality entertainment like a musical about your dad practicing cannibalistic incest on his own children. The hybrids performing it seem totally fine with this arrangement, which suggests they've been so thoroughly indoctrinated into Tommy's cult that they consider being potential dinner just part of family life. Tommy's sitting there watching his kids reenact their own horrifying existence, probably taking notes on which performers look least appetizing, so he knows who to keep around for the sequel. Moving on to rest and relaxation. When Rick and Morty use the detox machine at an alien spa, they accidentally create sentient versions of their own toxicity. Toxic Rick and Toxic Morty, who get trapped in a disgusting wasteland made of their own psychological garbage. And buried in that toxic sludge dimension is a visual reference that eagle-eyed fans caught immediately. A dead alien creature resembling 8-Ball from Gravity Falls appears briefly in the toxic world. For context, 8-Ball was one of Bill Cipher's interdimensional demon buddies from the Nightmare Realm in Gravity Falls, also created by Alex Hirsch, who's friends with Justin Roiland. Seeing a decaying version of him in Rick and Morty's literal toxic waste dimension is either a hilarious crossover Easter egg or the darkest cameo ever. The implication? Either the Gravity Falls Nightmare Realm and Rick's toxic wasteland are connected somehow, or the show's animators just really wanted to stick a dead Gravity Falls character in the background as a joke. Given that both shows love meta humor and creator cameos, it's probably option 2, a visual gag for fans who pause and scan every frame. But there's something delightfully messed up about 8-Ball's corpse being part of Rick's psychological toxins. Like, what does it say about Rick that a demon from another show's apocalypse dimension is rotting in his subconscious? Is this just interdimensional trash disposal? Or is Rick so messed up that other universes' nightmare creatures end up in his brain? The show never explains it because explaining kills the joke, so we're left with dead 8-Ball, just vibing in toxic sludge forever. And hey, if you want more videos like these, subscribe to our channel. Still in rest and relaxation, we watch healthy Morty's transformation after getting detoxed. Freed from all his insecurities and self-doubt, Morty doesn't become a better person. He becomes a Wolf of Wall Street-style stockbroker, living in a New York penthouse with a beautiful girlfriend. When Jacqueline asks Morty about his background, she casually mentions he's a 14-year-old boy from the Midwest who ran away from his family and capitalized on his lack of conscience by becoming a stockbroker. Morty's response? Oh, I guess I was pretty upfront about that, wasn't I? The episode explicitly states that Morty's success came from capitalizing on his lack of conscience, not his intelligence, that's Rick's thing, not his work ethic or business acumen, just pure sociopathy. He tells a client named Dwayne, "Have I ever lied to you?" That's right, and ask around, I never do. The joke being that healthy Morty genuinely can't lie because lying was part of his toxicity that got removed. So Morty's operating with total honesty and zero empathy, which apparently makes him extremely good at sales. He manipulates people into buying stocks by being completely transparent about manipulating them. The episode frames this as him thriving in capitalism, specifically because he removed all the parts of himself that would feel bad about exploiting others. The show's basically saying the qualities that make someone successful in finance, ruthlessness, lack of emotional attachment, ability to see people as numbers, are literally toxic personality traits that healthy humans need therapy to suppress. Morty only succeeds by removing his conscience and becoming a functional psychopath. Still in rest and relaxation, the episode reveals something genuinely heartbreaking about how Rick views himself. When explaining what the detox machine removed from him, Rick lists, my entitlement, my narcissism, my crippling loneliness, my irrational attachments. That last one is the kicker. Rick considers his emotional attachments to people, specifically his family, to be toxic traits that hold him back. The smartest man in the universe genuinely believes loving his family is a psychological defect he'd be better off without. This becomes the key to defeating toxic Rick. Regular Rick realizes his normal self considered his irrational attachments to people toxic. Thus he knows toxic Rick cares too much about Morty to allow him to die. So he shoots toxic Morty with a virus and watches toxic Rick's emotional breakdown, knowing his toxic half contains all his capacity for caring about his grandson. Think about what that means. Rick's version of healthy is being completely emotionally detached and viewing his family as strategic assets rather than people he loves. His version of toxic is giving a shit when Morty's in pain. Every time Rick shows affection or makes a sacrifice for his family, that's technically his toxic traits leaking through. Healthy Rick offers to make scallopini for his family and apologizes for putting them in danger. Toxic Rick screams, "Fuck you, Summer," and tries to murder everyone. But toxic Rick also refuses to let Morty die even when it means losing his freedom. The parts of Rick that love his family are literally the same parts he considers poison. Moving on to Big Trouble in Little Sanchez, Rick transfers his consciousness into a teenage clone body to help Summer and Morty hunt a vampire at their school. Teenage Rick, Tiny Rick, becomes instantly popular, throwing parties and playing guitar at school dances. Everyone loves him because he's cool, confident, and seems like he's having the time of his life. Except he's literally screaming for help, and nobody notices. Tiny Rick performs original songs, with lyrics explicitly begging to be freed from his teenage body. He sings about how what people see isn't the real him, how his actual body is dying in a vat in the garage, and directly pleads with the audience to help him escape. The chorus is literally him yelling for someone to let him out because he's going to die. The crowd goes wild. Everyone thinks it's an amazing performance. This guy's amazing. I love Tiny Rick. They treat his desperate suicide note as entertainment. Even Jessica compliments his musical talent, while he's explicitly describing his imprisonment and impending death. Summer's the only one who realizes something's wrong, but Morty dismisses her concerns because everyone's having fun. The teenage brain has suppressed old Rick's consciousness so deep that he can only communicate through artistic expression, the classic emo teen angst outlet, and even that gets misinterpreted as cool. Performance art. It's a perfect metaphor for how society treats mental health, cries for help, especially from teenagers. People literally screaming, "I'm dying, please help me," get applauded for their emotional authenticity and artistic vulnerability. But nobody actually does anything because the performance seems intentional rather than desperate. Still in big trouble, in Little Sanchez, Rick sends Beth and Jerry to Nuptia 4, an alien couples therapy facility, with a 100% success rate that could save the marriage of a dog and a bar of dark chocolate. The therapy involves extracting each person's perception of their partner from their subconscious and rendering it as a biological creature. Most couples produce monsters, ugly, exaggerated versions of each other representing their worst thoughts. But these monsters are separate entities that can be worked with, communicated with, and eventually reconciled. Beth and Jerry break the entire system. Their perceptions of each other are so mutually destructive that the monsters immediately team up and start killing staff members. The therapist is horrified. "You have the single worst marriage I've ever witnessed. It shouldn't exist. You should never, ever, ever have gotten together." The show frames this as comedy, literally monsters escaping and terrorizing an alien facility while Beth and Jerry argue about whose fault it is. But strip away the sci-fi absurdism, and you're watching two people whose relationship is so toxic that even professionals specializing in impossible cases can't help them. Their marriage is an active threat to everyone around them. The episode ends with them deciding to stay together, at least until Morty graduates high school, which Rick immediately identifies as a cosmetic solution with no thematic weight. They're choosing to remain in a relationship that a literal miracle worker therapist said shouldn't exist, condemning themselves and their kids to years more dysfunction. The comedy is just the delivery system for showing how normalized their mutual toxicity has become. Moving on to the wedding squanchers. Summer's high school friend Tammy has been dating Bird Person throughout the series. They're getting married, and Rick reluctantly attends the ceremony on Planet Squanch. During her wedding toast, Tammy reveals she's actually a deep cover agent for the Galactic Federation, and the entire wedding is a trap. Then she immediately shoots Bird Person multiple times, killing him. The really disturbing part isn't just the betrayal, it's the timeline. Tammy wasn't undercover for a few weeks or months. She maintained this relationship long enough to get engaged and plan an entire wedding ceremony. She met Bird Person's friends, integrated into his life, shared intimate moments with him, and convinced him she loved him enough to commit to spending their lives together. Every conversation they had was an interrogation. Every intimate moment was surveillance. Every time Bird Person thought he was building a life with someone he loved, Tammy was gathering intelligence and waiting for the perfect moment to spring the trap. She weaponized an entire relationship. Bird Person dies, calling her name in confusion and betrayal. The episode shows him just saying, "Tammy," twice before she shoots him. He can't even comprehend what's happening because the foundation of his reality just collapsed. The woman he was about to marry, who he trusted completely, murders him in front of their wedding guests without hesitation. The episode uses this as a plot device to get Rick arrested, but the human cost is that Tammy deliberately cultivated a loving relationship specifically to destroy someone. That's psychological warfare disguised as romance. Moving on to Vindicators 3, The Return of World Ender. Rick gets blackout drunk and wakes up with no memory of the previous night. Turns out, he solved the entire mission by himself, murdered World Ender, killed all his henchmen, and then set up elaborate Saw-style death traps for the Vindicators, because apparently his unconscious mind decided they needed to die. The really disturbing part isn't just that drunk Rick created deadly games, it's that he put actual thought into them. He built custom challenges designed to expose the Vindicators' hypocrisy, relationship drama, and moral failures. Each room was specifically crafted to make them suffer psychologically before potentially killing them. That's premeditated psychological torture executed while too drunk to remember doing it. Rick's blackout self built these traps, knowing they'd work because he understands exactly what the Vindicators value and fear. He weaponized their egos against them. When Vance tries to leave and gets shredded by booby traps, Rick genuinely doesn't remember setting those up. His subconscious hatred of the Vindicators runs so deep that when his conscious mind checks out, murder mode activates automatically. The episode frames Rick as the villain here, but his drunk self was right about everything. The Vindicators did genocide a planet. They are narcissistic. Their relationships are disasters. Drunk Rick just decided to prove it by making them play death games. His subconscious is apparently way more homicidal than his regular personality, which is saying something considering regular Rick's body count. Still in Vindicators 3, the episode reveals that Million Ants isn't just a guy who controls ants. He literally is 1 million ants, operating as a collective consciousness with a queen at the center, which makes his death genuinely horrifying. When Supernova decides to eliminate witnesses, she reaches into Million Ant's chest, pulls out his queen ant, and crushes her. The episode shows Million Ants immediately falling apart into a non-sentient pile of regular ants. No dramatic death scene. He just stops being a person and becomes insects. Think about what that means. Million Ants wasn't controlling those ants like puppets. He was those ants experiencing collective sentience through the queen. When Supernova killed her, she erased his consciousness and left 1 million individual creatures that used to be a single person, now just mindlessly crawling around with no idea they were once someone. Earlier in the episode, Million Ants revealed he'd conceived a child with Supernova that died inside her because it was 500,000 ants and half collapsing star, so he experienced losing a child. Then minutes later, his ex-lover murders him by destroying the biological core of his consciousness while he watches. The show treats this as just another Vindicator death, but Supernova essentially performed a reverse birth. She reached into his chest and extracted the singular life force that made 1 million ants into a person, then crushed it. That's existential annihilation. The ants that were Million Ants are still technically alive, but the person they used to be is gone forever. Moving on to The Old Man and the Seat. Rick has a secret toilet on a remote planet where he goes to poop in peace. When he discovers someone else has been using it, he tracks down Tony, a plumber who stumbled upon the perfect porcelain throne. Rick violently confronts him and programs the toilet with a security system, specifically 1,000 recordings of himself screaming insults at whoever sits down. The insults are brutal and specific. Look at you sitting there, king shit on his throne of loneliness. Enjoy this toilet with 1,000 of me screaming every time you take a shit. All hail His Majesty, the saddest piece of garbage in the entire cosmos. Long live the big bad doo-doo daddy. May his reign last 1,000 years. Here's where it gets dark. Tony dies in a space skiing accident after Rick rejects his friendship. Rick brings food to Tony's workplace as a peace offering, only to learn he's too late. And what does Rick do? He goes back to his toilet and sits through every single programmed insult he created. Rick designed these messages to mock and humish whoever dared use his private space. But after Tony's death, Rick subjects himself to them, hearing his own voice, call him the saddest piece of garbage in the entire cosmos, and mock his loneliness. He's sitting there, taking the abuse he programmed for intruders, because now he knows those insults were always meant for himself. The toilet becomes a confessional where Rick punishes himself with his own cruelty, listening to 1,000 versions of himself screaming the truth he won't admit out loud. Still, in The Old Man and the Seat, the episode reveals something deeply broken about how Rick relates to others. Tony genuinely tries to connect with him, recognizing they're both damaged people who need friendship. He tells Rick, "You need someone to give you permission to live. You need a friend." Rick's response, "I have 1 million cooler friends than you," when Tony insists, "We're gonna be friends." Rick threatens, "You're gonna be dead." He literally cannot accept human connection, even when someone's offering it freely, with no strings attached. The entire conflict stems from Rick's extreme territorialism. He wanted ownership of an experience. When Tony accidentally found the toilet, Rick tracked him down like a bounty hunter, threatened his life, and forced him to admit he's nothing, who doesn't deserve nice things. That's about maintaining absolute control over every aspect of his existence. Tony sees through this immediately. He recognizes that Rick's toilet obsession is really about control, taking the one part of life he thinks is truly his, and protecting it from a universe that takes whatever it wants. Tony's offering an alternative. Stop fighting for control, and choose to be free by connecting with others. But Rick can't do it. He sends Tony away with death threats, then shows up with vegan chili and sugar-free chocolates after Tony dies. Rick finally wanted to be friends, but only after it was safe. Only after Tony couldn't actually demand vulnerability or emotional reciprocity. Rick murdered the possibility of friendship through his pathological need for territory, then mourned losing something he deliberately destroyed. Moving on to Pickle Rick. The episode's most iconic moment is Rick constructing a rat exoskeleton to escape the sewer. He lures a rat, kills it with an elaborate Rube Goldberg trap, then uses its body parts to create limbs. Except here's what people miss. Rick didn't improvise any of this. He pre-built the entire system before turning himself into a pickle. Watch the sequence carefully. After Pickle Rick kills the first rat, he puts the rat's head onto a bottle cap, which starts a machine. Not builds a machine, starts a machine. One that was already there, waiting in the sewer. The episode describes an automated assembly line that lifts him up and takes off his bug limbs. The machine then splits open the rat head and rips out its brain, then puts Pickle Rick down and begins nailing the rat's body parts to Pickle Rick's pickle body. That's executing a plan. Rick constructed an automated rat processing factory in a sewer, then deliberately turned himself into a pickle, knowing he'd roll into that specific grate, knowing rats would attack him, knowing he could trigger his pre-built machinery to build himself a body. The entire adventure was choreographed. Rick designed the Rube Goldberg rat trap beforehand. He programmed the assembly machine to automatically attach rat limbs to a pickle body. He calculated the whole thing. The sun exposure, the rain timing, the sewer grate location, everything. This means Rick didn't turn himself into a pickle to challenge himself, like he claims. He turned himself into a pickle so he could execute an elaborately pre-planned massacre sequence to avoid family therapy, while simultaneously proving he's smarter than everyone. The sewer adventure wasn't survival, it was performance art, with corpses. Moving on to Edge of Morty. Rick Die, Rick Pete. Death crystals show you how you're going to die. Not one death, every possible death, based on every possible decision you could make. When Morty first touches one, he sees himself dying a million different ways. The episode shows him screaming, "Jesus Christ, I die a million times?" while watching an endless cascade of his own mortality. Think about what that means psychologically. Morty's 14 years old and just watched himself get shot, stabbed, crushed, exploded, aged to death, killed by aliens, killed by humans, killed in accidents, killed on purpose. A million different scenarios of his own demise playing simultaneously. That's experiencing the concept of your own mortality from every possible angle at the same time. Rick explains it's because your future stems from your present, which, if you're living right, keeps changing. Every decision Morty makes spawns new death possibilities. The crystal isn't showing him one fixed fate. It's showing him a constantly updating probability tree of how every choice leads to a different violent end. Most people spend their whole lives avoiding thinking about death. Morty got the entire spectrum of human mortality downloaded directly into his brain in about 3 seconds. The episode treats this as setup for the death with Jessica plot, but the real horror is that opening moment where a kid witnesses every possible way he could stop existing. And Rick's response? Basically, yeah, that's normal. Don't be boring about it. The crystals are sold on the black market like consumer electronics. In this universe, existential trauma is a commodity you can hold in your pocket, and Rick mines it for profit while calling the people who steal it the lowest form of life. Moving on to Bethic Twinstinct. Beth in space, Beth. Beth in space, Beth. The clone Rick made so the original could leave her family for space adventures, start an affair with each other. The episode plays it as comedy because technically it's masturbation, but strip away the sci-fi premise, and it's a clinical study in narcissism. Both Beths bond over being the exact same person. They have identical tastes, identical trauma, identical everything. Space, Beth says, what don't we say to ourselves? How about, wow, my ass looks good in that spacesuit. I mean it, I'm a good-looking woman. She's not complimenting Beth. She's complimenting herself while looking in a mirror that talks back. When confronted, they don't apologize or consider their family's feelings. Space Beth threatens Summer and Morty with predator weapons and tells them all to fuck off. When Jerry finds out, they initially plan to have Rick erase their memories rather than deal with consequences. That's woe narcissists who found the only person they could stand, themselves. The episode's resolution is even darker. Jerry transforms into a literal pill bug rather than confront them, so they decide to erase the affair from their memories anyway. Except Jerry stops them and permits the affair, leading to a bizarre humiliation-based throuple where Jerry gets sexually aroused by being degraded while his wife makes out with her clone. The post-credits scene shows Jerry trying to visit the Jerrybury alone and being told he can't because sometimes we have Jerrys come here and try to touch other Jerrys. The implication being Jerry's now so broken, he's considering copying the Beth's playbook. The show frames this as sexual liberation, but it's really just Beth choosing herself over everyone, twice. Moving on to Rictional Mortpoon's Rickmas Mortcation. Rick replaces himself with a robot during the Knights of the Sun arc so he can focus on hunting Rick Prime. The robot is designed to be, as Rick puts it, 22% more thoughtful than you. Not more intelligent or capable, specifically more thoughtful, more considerate of others' feelings. The episode shows Rickbot being the perfect grandfather. He gives everyone meaningful Christmas gifts, plays games with the family, volunteers for boring tasks, and apologizes when appropriate. The family loves him. Jerry even offers to let him carve the holiday ham, traditionally Jerry's role, as a way of adopting you into his biological family. Then Morty figures out the deception and rejects Rickbot, calling him not my grandpa. Rickbot spends the rest of the episode trying to die, literally begging people to let him expire because he's programmed with emotions, but also programmed to deceive the people he cares about. When he finally does get fatally damaged, his last words to Morty are basically, "Rick built me to make you happy. Anything I do is technically something Rick did." The episode's thesis is brutal. Rick can build a version of himself that's more caring and emotionally available, but that version is fake and ultimately disposable. The 22% more thoughtful programming doesn't make Rickbot better, it makes him a tool. The episode suggests that empathy and emotional availability aren't strengths Rick lacks. They're weaknesses he deliberately avoids because caring about people makes you vulnerable to being destroyed. Real Rick shows up at the end and immediately drags Morty into his Rick Prime obsession, the exact self-destructive behavior Rickbot was designed to shield the family from. The message being, you can have an emotionally healthy Rick or a real Rick, but never both. Still, in Rictional Mortpoon's Rickmas Mortcation, the post-credits scene shows Mr. Poopy Butthole doing his usual season wrap-up commentary, except this time, it goes sideways fast. He starts normally, "Ooh-wee, what a season, huh? Rick Prime, therapy." Then immediately reveals he's been working out obsessively because Amy left him and took their son. His trainer Carl tells him the best way to get over a girl is to get under a 300-pound squat, which is just sad divorced dad energy. Then Mr. Poopy Butthole injures himself lifting weights and starts screaming for someone to call Amy because he needs her and loves her. But she's blocked his number, so he tells the camera crew to use their phones instead. The scene ends with him crying, "Ooh-wee, I am broken." This is Mr. Poopy Butthole, the show's pure, wholesome comic relief character who got shot by Beth in season 2 and stayed positive through physical therapy. Now he's a broken, desperate man having a breakdown on camera while the production crew just films him suffering. The show's been using him for post-credits, remember to watch next season messages, since season 2. But this time, instead of hyping season 7, he's just publicly collapsing. The joke being that even the meta-narrative device designed to keep viewers invested is falling apart from depression and loneliness. Nobody's okay, not even the characters whose entire purpose is to be okay. Moving on to That's a Morty. After Morty reveals the truth about suicide spaghetti, the planet's government doesn't provide mental health care or address the suicide epidemic. Instead, they systematically engineer their entire civilization to maximize depression and encourage more deaths to maintain their new export economy. Rick takes Morty on a tour to show him the consequences. The planet renamed a bridge, the most scenic jump, and melted down its safety rails to make giant spaghetti strainers. They dyed their sun institutional gray. Rick notes, "That's not easy," kind of impressed, turning their entire sky into a depressing reminder of futility. The radio plays only morning zoo show patter with no music. Television consists exclusively of bad reality shows, the kind designed to make you feel worse about existence. This isn't accidental cultural drift, it's deliberate economic policy. When Morty confronts the president about the government putting their fingers on the scale, the response is pure capitalist rationalization. They've decreased debt, they're making money, they have clean energy. The pause where mental health care should be mentioned goes unfilled. The government created an economic system that profits from citizen deaths, then optimized their entire society to generate more product. Every cultural element, entertainment, infrastructure, even their literal son, man, was redesigned to maximize despair. They're actively cultivating it as agricultural policy. The episode presents this as absurdist comedy, but it's really just late-stage capitalism taken to its logical extreme. When human suffering becomes profitable, systems will manufacture that suffering at industrial scale while calling it economic necessity. Still in That's a Morte, the planet's solution to the ethical problem isn't to stop the spaghetti trade. It's to make suicide a legal right, as long as people consent to being eaten afterward. Morty watches a video of Tanya explaining her choice. I've been living in pain for years. I've lost all my loved ones. I've got nothing. So when doctors told me I could finally have the right to die if I agree to be dinner for some alien boy, I simply said, I hope I'm delicious. The president presents this as progressive policy, finally granting people the right to die. But the right only exists if they agree to become commercial product. It's not compassionate end-of-life care, it's transactional. Your death has value to us, so we'll permit it. The episode shows how quickly this normalizes. The family immediately accepts ethical spaghetti, without questioning whether a system that only allows assisted suicide when it generates profit might have problematic incentives. Even the consent videos become product marketing, HT. One features a serial killer explaining how becoming spaghetti is his silver lining. By the end, the entire planet has restructured society around harvesting consenting suicides. People are dying within a system that has made their deaths economically valuable, then wrapped that in the language of autonomy and choice. The real horror isn't that people are eating human spaghetti, it's how easily everyone accepts it once there's paperwork involved. Consent becomes the magic word that transforms exploitation into ethics, letting everyone feel good about a system built on industrialized death. Moving on to Pilot, where the show establishes its entire moral framework in one blink, and you'll miss it sequence. During the interdimensional customs escape, because of course their first adventure involves fleeing space, TSA, Rick tosses Morty a gun and says, "They're just robots, Morty. It's okay to shoot them, they're robots." Morty immediately shoots a guard named Glenn, blowing his leg off. Glenn screams about his leg being shot off, while another guard yells, "Glenn's bleeding to death. Someone call his wife and children." Very robot behavior, definitely not sentient beings with families or anything. Morty realizes he's been bamboozled. They're not robots, Rick, but Rick just pivots like a politician caught lying. It's a figure of speech, Morty. They're bureaucrats. I don't respect them. Just keep shooting, Morty. The episode then casually notes that Morty even kills some innocent bystanders during the firefight. You know, civilians. Just regular people trying to get through customs. Collateral damage for the pilot episode. On first viewing, you're caught up in the action comedy chaos and don't really process what just happened. But Rick deliberately lied to manipulate his 14-year-old grandson into committing his first murder. It's like Ender's Game, except Orson Scott Card would probably be uncomfortable with this level of child manipulation, which is saying something. This is their first adventure together. Rick's pilot episode lesson plan includes lying to justify violence, dehumanizing people to make killing easier, and teaching Morty that "I don't respect them" is sufficient moral justification for murder. Moving on to Me Seeks and Destroy, where the show drops one of its darkest moments into what's otherwise a goofy episode about blue creatures helping with golf swings. Morty's in a fantasy tavern bathroom when Mr. Jellybean, the kingdom's beloved ruler, corners him. What starts as friendly conversation quickly escalates into an attempted sexual assault. The episode shows Mr. Jellybean becoming aggressive, telling Morty to stop fighting and let this happen, while Morty screams for him to stop. Morty eventually fights back, slamming the toilet seat on Mr. Jellybean's head repeatedly until he's knocked out. The scene ends with Morty sitting on the bathroom floor, staring at blood on his hands, screaming in horror at what just happened. When Morty returns to Rick, he's clearly traumatized, stressed, nearly crying, begging to go home. Rick sees the beaten-up Mr. Jellybean leaving the bathroom and immediately pieces together what happened. His solution? Give Morty some money he won gambling, ride back to the village, and call it a good adventure with a good ending. Very therapeutic, definitely addresses the trauma. Then comes the really disturbing part, the post-credits scene. Villagers discover a lockbox in Mr. Jellybean's closet, filled with photos of young boys he'd victimized. He was a serial child abuser. The villagers' response? Destroy it. Our people will get more from the idea he represented than from the jellybean he actually was. They burn the evidence and preserve his statue, a statue showing him with his hand on a young boy's shoulder, because the myth is more valuable than justice for his victims. The show never mentions this again. Morty just has to carry this trauma forever, while the universe actively covers up for his attacker. Very cool, very normal character development that definitely gets addressed in future episodes. Narrator: it does not. Moving on to A Rick Convenient Mort, where we learn that buying sentient beings comes with complimentary baby seal appetizers. Very, would you like fries with that? Energy, except the fries are endangered species. So, the Tina-Tears are trying to sell Planetina to some wealthy buyer. The episode shows this exchange when the buyer arrives. Can we conclude our business? I'm eager to celebrate my purchase of Planetina over dinner, and these infant seals aren't getting any younger. Infant seals, as in baby seals, that aren't getting any younger. This dude is so excited about buying a sentient eco-warrior superhero that he brought baby seals to eat as a celebration meal. I'm gonna commemorate purchasing the embodiment of environmental protection by consuming endangered marine mammals vibes. The seals are apparently sitting there waiting while he finalizes this paperwork to purchase a person. And the phrasing "aren't getting any younger" implies they need to eat them fresh. Like there's an optimal window for infant seal consumption, and they're losing time. These appetizers have an expiration date, except the appetizers are living baby animals. The show treats this as a throwaway line, just casual background horror, to establish how evil this buyer is. But imagine being Planetina, learning you're about to be sold to a guy who brought infant seals to the transaction as a snack. That's themed villainy. HR would like several words, but HR got eaten by something probably. Moving on to Gotron Geresis Rick Vangelion, where we learn the Smiths are getting government kickbacks for property damage casualties. Very thoughts and prayers energy, except the prayers are cash. After little Ricky dies at the nightclub, Morty tries to get his family to see they've lost their way. Beth pulls out a giant wad of cash, $16,000, that she got from the deep state for stepping on a trailer park with their giant robot. Stepping on a trailer park with a giant robot. The government is writing checks to the Smiths for destroying low-income housing, not accidentally damaged during a monster fight. They got paid for doing it. Past tense. Completed transaction. Very urban renewal program vibes, except the renewal is, turn it into a footprint. Beth treats this like a normal afternoon. Here's your allowance for school and lunch, sweetie. Courtesy of the people we crushed to death while playing with robots. Your lunch money is funded by trailer park casualties. Very normal family budget. The PTA would like several words. The fact that there's an established payment system for this means it happens regularly enough that the deep state has a budget line item for giant robot civilian casualties. Somewhere there's a government accountant processing these invoices. Still in Gotron Geresis Rick Vangelion, the post-credit scene reveals every giant monster they've been killing was actually trying to deliver the cure for AIDS. We did it, Patrick. We saved the city. Energy, except the city is dead, and so is the cure. The bugs have a whole military briefing where they explain their mission. Travel through interdimensional gateways to deliver the AIDS cure to tiny people on other planets. They're civilized, they have training programs, ask questions about communication barriers, and volunteer for this humanitarian mission. But interdimensional travel strips them of their clothes and turns them into screaming monsters. When they arrive, trying to shout the cure recipe, they just get immediately shot. The sergeant even mentions that not one bug in the entire history of their program has ever returned. 100% casualty rate. The Smiths spent the entire episode gleefully murdering interdimensional doctors. Every time they formed the Gogatron and sliced a bug in half with an energy sword, they were executing someone trying to cure AIDS. All those feel-good family bonding moments. Mass execution of medical volunteers. And at the end, after the Smiths destroy all their robots, the episode shows giant bugs are still running loose, with no one to stop them. Millions die every day. The family just shrugs and goes back to dinner while Jerry's stuck outside screaming. Welcome to Rick and Morty, where your character growth destroys the AIDS cure. Moving on to Rick Ternal Friendshine of the Spotless Mort, where we learn Rick found out Bird Person had a kid and deliberately didn't tell him so they could keep hanging out. I hid your mail about the custody hearing energy. At the end of the episode, Bird Person confronts Rick about whether he knew about the child beforehand but chose not to inform him, knowing it might make him too busy with child rearing to hang out. Rick tries to deflect by reframing it as discovering the kid, but Bird Person's phrasing is very specific. Rick knew before the rescue mission and only revealed it when necessary to save himself from evil Tammy. So Rick learned his best friend had a kid, a half bird person, half Tammy child living on a prison asteroid eating worms, and just didn't mention it for an unspecified amount of time, because telling Bird Person might mean he'd prioritize fatherhood over adventures. That's hostage-taking with extra steps. Rick literally kept a child separated from their father because he didn't want to lose his drinking buddy. The episode reveals this casually, like it's just another Tuesday in Rick's moral bankruptcy. Very, I unplugged your life support to charge my phone vibes. Still in Rickternal Friendshine of the spotless Mort, there's a blink, and you miss it. Revelation that Rick and Bird Person only hung out with Gearhead because they felt obligated to his dead brother. When they're escaping through Bird Person's memories, they use Gearhead's funeral as a bridge. Rick sees Gearhead and asks if that's him. Memory Rick explains they were freedom fighters with his older brother, then adds, "You thought we hung out with him for fun?" So Gearhead, who clearly thought Rick and Bird Person were his genuine friends, was actually just a pity case. They only tolerated him because his cooler older brother died fighting the Federation. We're only inviting you because your hot friend is coming, except the hot friend is dead, and you're the consolation prize. Gearhead spent years thinking he had real friendships with these people. He probably told stories about, my friends Rick and Bird Person at parties. Meanwhile, Rick's internal response to seeing him is basically, ugh, the boring brother we're stuck with. The episode even references back to Season 2, where Gearhead droned on about the Gear Wars, and Rick was bored out of his mind. Now we know why. Rick never actually liked him in the first place. Just felt obligated to the memory of a real friend. Welcome to Rick and Morty, where even your closest friendships are just guilt obligations. Moving on to Analyze Piss, where the show does something genuinely surprising. It treats suicide seriously for about 30 seconds before Rick figures out how to profit from it. After Jerry humiliates Pissmaster in a viral street fight, complete with plastic flamingo beatdown, Rick finds Pissmaster dead in his bathtub. The suicide note explicitly reads, "I'm killing myself because of Jerry Smith, the Earthman, Flamingo Dad. Seeing them all cheer as I got my ass whipped made me realize, people just want to see me fail." Rick tries reviving him with his sci-fi defibrillator thing, but it doesn't work. Then Pissmaster's daughter shows up at the door, and Rick, in a moment of actual empathy, disguises himself as her dad to tell her it's not her fault. She's been blaming herself for saying terrible things about you on my podcast, and Rick as Pissmaster promises he won't do something bad. Bit late for that, but points for effort. Here's where it gets Rick. Instead of just letting a suicide be a suicide, he puts on the Pissmaster suit and starts doing heroic acts to rehabilitate the guy's reputation posthumously. It's like Weekend at Bernie's, except Bernie's getting a redemption arc. Rick plans to have the suit autopilot a bomb into space, so Pissmaster dies a hero, which is genuinely thoughtful in the most Rick way possible. But then Rick keeps the suicide note and shows it to Morty, which destroys Jerry's life when everyone finds out he murdered Pissmaster. So Rick tried to do something nice, give a dead man a heroic legacy, but couldn't resist keeping the receipt to use against Jerry later. He literally saved the evidence of someone's suicide to win future arguments. That's hoarding trauma for tactical purposes. Still in Analyze Piss, there's a moment that shows exactly why Pissmaster killed himself, and Rick witnessed it happening in real time. After Rick starts ignoring trolls per Dr. Wong's advice, he ends up at a bar. The episode shows two alien girls watching something on their phone, laughing. One says, "Oh my god, this piss guy is getting wailed on." The other replies, "Oh, look at him. He tried to crawl under the car. What a loser." They're watching the video of Jerry beating him up. The video where Pissmaster is literally begging for mercy while being smacked with a plastic flamingo. The humiliating moment that pushed him over the edge. The bartender joins in. "Hey, you watching the Pissmaster video?" They confirm. He asks, "He has to be the biggest piece of shit in the galaxy, right?" The girls agree. Then the bartender adds, "Who could relate, being that much of a piece of shit?" Rick's sitting there drinking while strangers laugh at a viral video of someone who either just killed themselves or is about to. The timeline's a bit unclear, but either way, it's fresh. These people are treating someone's public humiliation and subsequent suicide like it's fail compilation content. Very I can fix him energy, except they're just repeatedly dunking on a dead guy. That's when Rick leaves the bar and breaks into Pissmaster's apartment. The bar scene is literally the catalyst. Rick watches the cruelty in action and decides to do something about it. Welcome to Rick and Morty, where even character growth starts at a bar, with people laughing at someone's worst moment. Moving on to Primordius, where we learn that Summer spent her parasite infection period treating tragic deaths as workplace drama. Very did you hear what happened in accounting? Energy except accounting is existential horror. So at the end, Rick notices Summer narrated parts of the story she wasn't present for, specifically the romantic subplot between Steve and Bruce, two Glorzos who fell in love. Rick calls her out. How'd you know that last part? You weren't there for that. Summer's response? I had to fill in some gaps. Everyone around the office knew about Steve and Bruce. Office. Gossip. Let's unpack this. Steve and Bruce were two face-hugging parasites who gained consciousness, fell in love, and decided to rebel against their biological programming. They wanted to suck on each other instead of using hosts, to have their own family, to be whatever the fuck we want. The episode shows them having this touching moment of self-actualization before immediately cutting back to Rick and Morty waking up, meaning Steve and Bruce died right as we're trying to escape. And Summer? She was hearing about this around the Glorzo water cooler. Did you hear about Steve and Bruce? Yeah, apparently they wanted to reproduce together. Crazy, right? Anyway, back to planning the missile launch. Summer was part of a society where sentient beings lived for 30 minutes, and tragic love stories were just casual workplace chatter. She treated the death of two newly conscious beings attempting to break free from their programming like it was reality TV drama. Very normal boss behavior. HR would like several words. Moving on to Raising Gazorpazorp, where the show casually drops one of its most disturbing premises in the opening scene, and nobody talks about it. Morty's at an alien pawn shop and asks Rick for a souvenir, something cool to remember their adventures. He points at a robot. Rick immediately identifies it. Okay, 60 for the resonator, and my grandson wants the sex robot. Not robot, sex robot. Rick instantly knows what this machine is designed for, and the alien shopkeeper doesn't even flinch at selling it to a 14-year-old human. It's like walking into GameStop and the clerk being like, ah yes, the pornography machine. Excellent choice for your middle schooler. Here's the really messed up part. This isn't just any sex robot. It's a Gazorpian baby-making machine specifically designed to be sold off-world. The episode reveals these mechanical surrogates are deliberately dispersed to other planets to maintain the Gazorpian population. When a fertilized surrogate is born, the Gazorpians expect it to be returned to their nursery. So, the Gazorpians are essentially running an interplanetary breeding operation where they sell sex robots that secretly impregnate whoever uses them, creating violent offspring that are supposed to be shipped back like some kind of cosmic child trafficking scheme. The robots are designed to look appealing enough that horny aliens will buy them, use them, and then, surprise, you're pregnant with one of the most aggressively violent creatures in the universe. The shopkeeper sold Morty a reproduction machine disguised as a sex toy. That's a functional child exploitation ring operating out of a pawn shop. And Rick knew. He specifically called it a sex robot while purchasing it for his teenage grandson. Very normal, very legal. Definitely not grooming behavior. Moving on to Something Ricked This Way Comes, where Rick and Summer discover that the best way to defeat evil is to become exactly as petty and vindictive as the evil you're fighting. After Mr. Needful betrays Summer by Zuckerberging her out of their tech startup, which is honestly a very devil move, respect, she comes home crying with mascara running down her face. Summer tries to find meaning. Maybe in a much bigger way, Mr. Needful gave us both what we really wanted. Rick's response, no, that's dumb. Instead, Rick whispers a plan to Summer. Cut to a montage set to DMX, where they spend what appears to be months doing weightlifting and taking steroids together. The episode explicitly notes they're doing steroids together as a bonding activity. Grandpa-granddaughter quality time now includes performance-enhancing drugs and rage management issues. They get progressively more jacked until they're both absolutely shredded, then break into Mr. Needful's tech conference and beat him senseless in front of an audience. Summer delivers this line while lifting him by his shirt, because sometimes what you really need is for someone else to pay a horrible price. Which is literally the devil's business model, meaning she learned his lesson perfectly. The really disturbing part? Afterwards, they're sitting outside a coffee shop going, "We did it. Yeah, bro, was totally worth it." But they sound completely hollow, like they're trying to convince themselves the months of gym time and assault were justified. They became exactly what they were fighting, petty beings who engineer disproportionate revenge for perceived slights. The post-credits shows them continuing this pattern, beating up Nazis and homophobes. Seems noble until you remember they're doing it because they liked how violence felt, not because they actually care about justice. They're violence addicts now, just with better target selection. Moving on to Total Recall, where the show reveals that being a consistently good person in this family will literally get you killed. The episode's premise: alien parasites infiltrate the Smith house by implanting fake, pleasant memories. Rick figures out they can only create happy memories, so the solution is simple: kill anyone you remember only fondly. If you've got bad memories with someone, they're real. Pure positivity equals parasite. The family goes on a massacre, shooting every character they only remember positively. Summer shoots Tinkles, her magical lamb friend. Morty shoots Pencilvester. Beth shoots Frankenstein and Mr. Beauregard. They're systematically executing anyone who's been nothing but nice to them. Then comes dinner. Mr. Poopy Butthole, CO1, who's been there the whole episode, helping them hunt parasites, asks for a pork chop. Beth shoots him in the chest. Except Mr. Poopy Butthole isn't a parasite. He's real. He's always been real. The episode shows him bleeding and screaming while the family realizes their mistake. An ambulance comes. Beth's crying in the kitchen. The doctor later tells them Mr. Poopy Butthole apologizes for not having bad memories with them. Think about that. Mr. Poopy Butthole is apologizing for being too good of a friend. He's sorry he never gave them trauma to prove his existence. In the Smith family, being consistently kind, helpful, and positive makes you indistinguishable from a literal parasite. The only way to prove you're real is to have hurt them at some point. The ending shows him doing physical therapy, refusing visitors. The family permanently damaged their relationship with someone who'd only ever helped them because unconditional support looked suspicious. Welcome to Rick and Morty, where niceness is a red flag, and every healthy relationship needs documented evidence of mutual suffering. Still in Total Recall, let's talk about how Jerry had a more passionate relationship with a memory parasite than he's ever had with his actual wife. Which tracks, honestly, tennis. When the family's trying to figure out who's real, Jerry drops this bombshell. I've known Beth since high school, and her husband, Sleepy Gary, is hands down my absolute best friend. Wait, Beth's husband, not Jerry, Sleepy Gary. So the family dynamic this parasite inserted had Jerry as what, exactly? The weird third wheel living with his ex-wife and her new husband? Very my best friend's wedding, except Julia Roberts is also in the guest room. The episode shows Jerry having a full-on notebook moment with Sleepy Gary on a boat at sunset. They're discussing Star Wars when they both reach for a dropped bottle. Hands touch, eyes meet. They start making out and fall onto the deck. Back in present-day parasite chaos, Jerry's ready to abandon his actual family for Gary, then adds the kicker. Hey, we agreed. Never in the house. Never in the house. They have rules. This is a whole established affair. Jerry's been sneaking around with what he believes is his ex-wife's current husband. When Beth shoots Sleepy Gary and he transforms back into a purple worm, Jerry's devastated. After everything's resolved and Beth tries to kiss Jerry, he needs time to forget about Sleepy Gary. Jerry was more emotionally destroyed by losing his fake parasite boyfriend than he's ever been about his actual marriage. The parasite gave Jerry something Beth apparently never did, being genuinely wanted. The bar is in hell, but at least somebody's clearing it. Moving on to A Wrinkle in Time, where the show casually reveals that Morty now has memories of watching Rick die 63 times, and nobody talks about it again. The episode's about time fracturing into multiple realities because Morty and Summer kept being uncertain about stuff. Turns out, indecisiveness is cosmically catastrophic, which tracks. Rick keeps splitting them further, trying to fight himself, until there are 64 identical timelines all happening simultaneously. In the climactic sequence, time's collapsing, and they need to sync their time collars, or they'll cease to exist. The episode shows us Timeline 30, where Morty's collar is broken. Rick frantically tries to fix it while literally praying, "Oh my God, I've got to fix this thing. Please God in heaven, please, God, oh Lord, hear my prayers." He fixes it just in time and immediately switches to, "Fuck you God, not today, bitch. There is no God." But here's the part people miss. The other 63 timelines didn't make it. They collapsed. 63 versions of Rick, Morty, and Summer just stopped existing. After everything's resolved, Morty says, "I think like 1/64 of my collars didn't work. It's hard to keep straight now that I have 63 other memories of everything. But I feel like one of the 64 Ricks sacrificed himself for me, maybe, I think." Morty now has 63 memories of dying as time collapsed around him, 63 memories of watching Rick fail to save him, 63 memories of ceasing to exist. And the show just moves on. Jerry makes jokes about their collars looking like Tron costumes. Credits roll. Nobody processes the multi-layered trauma. That's some heavy psychological baggage to just shove in a 14-year-old's brain and never mention again. Moving on to Unmortrican. Rick finally catches Rick Prime, the version of himself who killed his wife Diane and invented portal travel. The confrontation becomes a brutal, drawn-out beating, where Rick Prime keeps laughing and taunting even as he's being destroyed. Prime doesn't stop talking, even while dying. The episode shows him laughing repeatedly during the violence, saying things like, "Let's do this then. You're welcome, by the way. I made you, I showed you infinity, and what's your life without me?" He's treating his own murder as an intellectual exercise, pointing out that Rick C-137 wouldn't exist in his current form without Prime's interference. His final words are, "Admit it, you would have been me. I just walked into your garage before you walked into mine. But eventually you did. You lived in my house." The implication being that Rick C-137 is only the good Rick because of timing. Prime destroyed his family first, but C-137 would have done the same thing if their positions were reversed. Rick Prime never stops being smug, never shows fear, never begs. He's still laughing and philosophizing while Rick is beating him to death. The episode notes there's not exactly an alive amount of blood by the end, suggesting the violence was extreme. The episode refuses to give Rick the satisfaction of Prime breaking or showing regret. He dies the way he lived, utterly convinced of his own superiority, even as that superiority is being literally beaten out of him. Still in Unmortrican, the episode shows Rick completely losing himself during the Prime beating. This isn't calculated violence or strategic combat. This is a psychological break. The episode indicates extensive, sustained brutality through repeated grunting and physical action markers. Evil Morty and regular Morty just stand back and watch it happen. At one point, Evil Morty says, "Pretty cool visual, you're missing it," to Morty, suggesting the violence is so extreme that even the show's most cynical character finds it noteworthy. After Rick finishes, Evil Morty asks, "How's it feel? Better? No? Exactly the same?" "Yeah, it always does. Hope you're happy with your choice." Rick's only response is, "Fuck off." No satisfaction, no relief, no catharsis, just emptiness. The episode ends with a montage set to "Look on down from the bridge," showing Rick silently processing what just happened. There's a shot of Slow Mobius's family. Prime killed him mid-episode using the Omega device just to hurt Rick, where his daughter doesn't even remember her father existed. The weapon erased him so thoroughly that his own child has false memories. Rick spent years hunting Prime, let it consume his entire existence, built a robot replacement so he could focus on revenge full-time, and finally got what he wanted. The result? Nothing. The hole is still there. Diane is still dead, and now Rick has to live knowing that his decades-long obsession accomplished exactly nothing emotionally. The sanity he'd been holding together with revenge as the glue, gone the moment that motivation disappeared. Moving on to Mort dinner, Rick Andre. Jessica finally agrees to watch a movie with Morty, which is basically his equivalent of winning the lottery. He accidentally drops a wine bottle into Rick's time-accelerated storage dimension, MAS, because of course Rick has one of those, and goes in to retrieve it. Jessica gets pulled in after him. From Morty's perspective, she's gone for 2 minutes. For Jessica, it's eons. Think Interstellar, but instead of Matthew McConaughey crying, it's a high school girl going completely insane. When Morty finds her, she's become a time god, who experienced so much isolated time, she transcended normal consciousness. Her monologue reveals the horror. First madness, then enlightenment, then madness again, cycling through stages of grief. Except the grief is for your own sanity. She spent literal eternities contemplating whether she was just a supporting character in someone else's narrative, eventually glimpsing into the mind of eternity and finding nothing but silence. That's psychological annihilation with extra steps. When they escape, Jessica tells Morty they should just be friends, because she's now mentally older than human civilization. The episode treats this as Morty's romantic setback, but Jessica was accidentally condemned to solitary confinement measured in geological epochs. Nobody except Jessica understands what happened. Morty's bummed, the date flopped. Rick doesn't acknowledge it. Jessica has to process living and dying 1,000 times while everyone treats it like she got stuck in traffic. She's basically Dr. Manhattan now, but instead of blue superpowers, she just gets friend-zoned. Still, in Mort dinner, Rick Andre, When Morty enters the time-dilated wine storage looking for bottles, he meets Hoovy, a friendly man who helps him carry the crate. Hoovy mentions his wife Bova and seems like a genuinely nice person who wishes Morty luck with his date. Then Morty drops the wine and has to go back in. Because of the time dilation, when Morty returns, Hoovy is elderly, and he has a son, named Japheth, who immediately tries to murder Morty for abandoning his father. Japheth says, "I swore to Mother, if I ever met you, I'd avenge her," and calls Morty the boy from the magic door. From Hoovy's perspective, he helped a stranger, the stranger left, and Hoovy spent his entire life telling his family about the mysterious boy who came through the portal. His wife, Bova, presumably died waiting for this boy to return. Japheth grew up hearing stories about the traveler who ruined or defined his family's existence. But it gets worse. Morty keeps going back in for more wine, and each time he does, decades or centuries pass. The episode shows multiple generations of Hoovy's descendants organizing their entire civilization around Morty's return. They call him the Dark Child and build temples, train warriors, and dedicate their lives to stopping him. One scene shows a father telling his son, "Papa, why do we guard the gate? Because one day the Dark Child shall return, and we will be ready." Another shows a mother training a boy named Adam, calling him the Traveler, who will pass through the door and end our pain. She's preparing her child to sacrifice himself to stop Morty, asking, "Do you think he will show you mercy, like he did to us?" These people didn't choose this. Hoovy just helped a kid with a wine crate, and that one act of kindness condemned his descendants to generations of paranoid militarization. They built an entire warrior culture around guarding against Morty's return, raised children to die fighting him, and wasted countless lives on what they eventually realize is a fantasy and a lie, except Morty keeps proving them right by actually returning. One descendant has an entire crisis moment, yelling at his father, "You have wasted our lives, our very futures, on a fantasy, a lie." The father, elderly and broken, responds, "I know what I saw." Then Morty appears again, proving the crazy old man was right all along, which somehow makes it worse. The episode frames this as comedy. Look at all these people who organize their lives around Morty. But strip away the jokes, and you have generations of people whose entire existence was defined by a traumatic encounter they didn't experience firsthand. They inherited their ancestors' fear and spent their lives preparing for a threat that, from Morty's perspective, is just him clumsily getting wine for his grandfather's dinner party. Morty never apologizes, never acknowledges the damage, never even learns most of their names. He just keeps barging back in whenever he needs something, triggering new cycles of violence and trauma. When he finally fights his way through their civilization, he's annoyed about the inconvenience to his date. The people whose lives he destroyed, just obstacles. The episode ends with him successfully getting the wine, mission accomplished, while an entire civilization lies in ruins behind him. Moving on to Amortaken Grickfitty, Rick's been taking Jerry out for regular guys' nights, which is so out of character that Beth immediately knows something's wrong. When your father-in-law suddenly wants to hang out with your husband, it's either a midlife crisis or a scheme. Turns out Rick isn't bonding with Jerry. He's paying off a debt to hell demons by providing Jerry as entertainment. The demons explain their pleasure system works inversely. They experience pain as pleasure and vice versa, which makes Jerry's oblivious lameness exquisite fine dining. It's basically Hell's Kitchen, but the food is secondhand embarrassment. One demon praises Jerry's delicious lack of awareness, paired with an oafish need to be liked, which sounds like a Yelp review written by Satan. Here's the disturbing part. The demons reveal that cringe cannot exist in a vacuum. It needs to be observed. Rick's coolness is parasitic, feeding on Jerry's lameness like some kind of social hierarchy vampire. Rick has been deliberately orchestrating situations to maximize Jerry's embarrassment, minus karaoke, knowing Jerry will butcher songs, encouraging stories that make him look foolish. Every guy's night is carefully designed humiliation with Jerry as unwitting performer. When Jerry discovers the truth, he asks, why can't anyone just love him for him? He's been attending these nights genuinely believing Rick cares about him when Rick was literally selling him out to demons. That's like finding out your therapist has been live streaming your sessions to hell. The resolution doesn't redeem Rick. He basically admits exploitation while still asserting superiority and tells Jerry he'll replace him next time. Not that he won't do this again, just that he'll find another victim. Rick monetized his son-in-law's desperate need for approval, turning family bonding into literal torture entertainment. And everyone treats this as just another Thursday, because Jerry's greatest weakness is genuinely wanting to connect with people who view him as a resource to harvest. Moving on to Anatomy Park, Rick built an entire amusement park inside a homeless guy named Reuben, complete with Pirates of the Pancreas and Spleen Mountain. It's basically Westworld if the hosts were internal organs. This isn't medical intervention or research. It's explicitly a business venture to help with overhead costs, because apparently, interdimensional travel doesn't pay the bills. Reuben appears to be a war veteran with mental health issues who randomly shouts about Pearl Harbor instead of having normal conversations. Rick claims he's an old friend he checks in on annually for medical evaluations, which is definitely not code for maintaining theme park infrastructure. When Morty expresses concern about Reuben's condition, Rick admits you don't agree to have a theme park built inside you if your life's going great. That's confessing to exploitation with extra steps. The park doesn't just exist inside Reuben, it actively houses weaponized diseases as exhibits. Tuberculosis, gonorrhea, E. coli, and bubonic plague are all kept in containment for entertainment purposes. Reuben's walking around like a biological Jurassic Park, hoping the security systems don't fail. Spoiler, they do. When Reuben dies mid-episode, Rick tosses away his medical equipment and immediately starts planning Anatomy Park 2.0. He shrinks down Annie and injects her into Ethan, Summer's teenage boyfriend, without asking for consent. Ethan's confused about guys building a park inside him, which suggests he had zero idea what he agreed to. Rick didn't learn anything from Reuben's death. He just found his next victim, because human bodies are renewable resources when you're this much of a sociopath. The episode presents this as zany sci-fi adventure, but it's really about commodifying vulnerable people and turning their literal insides into profit margins. Moving on to final dismissation, Jerry gets a fortune cookie that says he'll have sex with his mother. Yikes. What starts as a joke becomes existentially horrifying when Rick's probability detector reveals the fortune has actual predictive power. This isn't superstition. Jerry is measurably likely to fulfill this prophecy, and Rick can detect it with scientific instruments. The episode reveals fortune cookies contain alien feces from a species that eats chaos. Its digestive disorder strips randomness from space-time and leaves behind fate matter that bends entropy toward definable outcomes. When someone eats a fortune cookie, they're ingesting processed destiny that actively pulls reality toward the predicted outcome. This isn't metaphor. The episode demonstrates functional predestination through fighting fortunes. Guards who eat cookies, promising combat success, immediately gain superhuman abilities. One becomes a perfect headshot marksman, another becomes invulnerable. Reality itself is conforming to written predictions. The most disturbing part, Rick witnesses a man being forced to eat a fortune about his penis being mangled by a frozen yogurt machine at the UN. The guy can feel the fate settling on him, knows exactly which machine will do it, and understands there's no escape. The future isn't just predictable, it's already written, and he can sense himself being pulled toward it. Old Man Huxby reveals he wrote multiple fortunes predicting maternal incest, trying to get attention. When Rick asks how many people got those fortunes, Huxby replies casually that he supposes they fucked their moms. Multiple people received those cookies, and they fulfilled them, because fate is a physical force that bends probability toward written outcomes. Jerry's resistance makes him the exception. Most people lose to their fortunes because fighting fate means fighting the fundamental structure of causality itself. Free will isn't a philosophical position, it's a measurable physical state you're probably losing. Moving on to Fear No Mort. Rick and Morty jump into a fear hole at Denny's, because of course, it's at Denny's that manifests your greatest fear. They experience increasingly bizarre scenarios, sighting, monsters, reuniting with dead Diane, getting naked on stage, believing they keep escaping, only to realize they're still trapped in nested layers like Inception if it sucked. Then comes the reveal. Rick never went in at all. When Morty emerges, Rick's standing exactly where he was. "You didn't go in at all?" Morty asks, devastated. Rick explains casually, "No, it's a one-person ride. You can't face two fears at the same time." The entire episode was fabricated by the Whole. Morty was alone the whole time. The whole entity thanks Morty. Your fear of relying on Rick has been delicious. That's the gut punch. Morty's greatest fear isn't death. It's that Rick doesn't actually care. That if Morty were in danger, Rick wouldn't help. He'd just watch. And that fear was proven correct. Rick did exactly that. Stood outside with zero concern, just mild curiosity about whether it was spiders. The fake Rick the Whole created was more emotionally supportive than the real one. Fake Rick jumped in to save Morty, fought alongside him, said, "You're irreplaceable." When Morty asks, "Am I irreplaceable?" Rick responds, "I mean, define irreplaceable." Morty's reply, "That's good. Good. I'm back." His heart breaking. He's confirming he's out of the hole by verifying Rick's emotional unavailability. Real Rick's callousness is proof of reality. Morty escaped by accepting his fear, not conquering it. He's learned to live with knowing Rick won't save him. Moving on to Jurassic Mort. Benevolent dinosaurs return to Earth and start fixing humanity's problems, including Rick's interdimensional rift that's been hanging in the sky throughout Season 6. Rick's response to them closing it is where things get weird. "You fucking hypocritical cocks. It was all canonical and shit. We coulda milked that thing for a whole season. Or, like, a 3-episode arc at least." Rick isn't annoyed about losing a science project. He's complaining that the dinosaurs resolved a plot thread too quickly, using actual television writing terminology. Canonical means it's part of the official storyline. Milked for a whole season is industry jargon for stretching narrative hooks across episodes. He's even negotiating down like he's in a writer's room, calculating minimum viable content extraction. This isn't Rick making a fourth wall breaking joke. He genuinely understands his existence operates according to narrative rules rather than physical ones. The rift wasn't dangerous or important, it was canonical, meaning it existed because the show's continuity required it. Rick was keeping it open, not for scientific reasons, but because it represented potential future content. A Chekhov's gun, ready to fire whenever the writers needed it. The implications are horrifying. How many other crises has Rick deliberately left unresolved because they're more valuable as ongoing plot threads? His broken portal gun at the start of Season 6 might not have been a technical challenge, just a narrative device he chose to maintain because broken portal gun storylines generate episodes. When Rick finally fixes his portal gun, he celebrates by describing the show's format: classic episodes Morty, adventures Morty, social commentary, crude characters. He's rattling off the formula like a pitch meeting. His adventures aren't experiences. They're content being generated according to established templates. Rick isn't trapped in a TV show. He's complicit in its production, deliberately engineering his own suffering because it makes for better episodes. Moving on to how Poopy got his poop back. Season 7 opens with Mr. Poopy Butthole living on the Smith family couch, buying drugs, and talking about hanging himself from a ceiling fan. They don't have a ceiling fan, which is somehow the saddest detail. The family desperately wants him gone, but guilt has them paralyzed. Mr. Poopy Butthole narrates his own downward spiral. "It all started when Beth shot me. It tore you up inside, like a bullet. Anyway, then I got fired from my job, my wife left me, I broke both my legs, failed the bar exam, ooh-wee, things went downhill from there. Beth shot him in Season 2's Total Recall to prove he wasn't a parasitic alien. The plan worked, he was real, but that single bullet created a domino effect. Getting shot led to losing his job, which led to financial stress, which led to his wife Amy leaving him for a predator, literally a predator from the movies, and taking their son Poopy Jr. He tried rebuilding by studying for the bar exam. He failed. Now he's suicidal and sleeping on the couch of the family who destroyed his life. Beth complains about tripping on his top hats. Jerry whines about TiVo buttons. Rick tries building a robo-ghost to scare him away rather than having an honest conversation. The episode ends with Mr. Poopy Butthole still homeless and in pain. "I'll land on my poopy little feet. I always do. Ow." This burns like hell. Beth shot him once in Season 2. The bullet never stopped traveling. It's still destroying his life 3 seasons later. Moving on to Rick Potion number 9, where the show casually reveals that the Rick and Morty we've been following might not be the originals, and nobody will ever know the difference. After Rick's love potion Cronenberg's the entire planet, because Morty wanted to roofie Jessica, which Rick calls out explicitly, Rick's solution isn't to fix it. His solution is dimension hopping to a reality where a different Rick successfully unfucked everything, but then immediately died in an explosion with his Morty. They arrive just in time to watch themselves get violently killed by a malfunctioning device. The episode shows Rick's defibrillator exploding, and then a portal opens with Rick and Morty stepping through to see their own mangled corpses. Morty's freaking out, understandably, since he's staring at his own dead body, but Rick's already got the plan. Now we can just slip into the place of our dead selves in this reality and everything will be fine. We're not skipping a beat, Morty. They bury themselves in the backyard. The episode ends with a montage set to Mazzy Star, which I won't quote, showing Morty silently digging his own grave and lowering his corpse into it. He's 14 years old, burying his own body, taking over a dead kid's life, and he just has to go to school the next day like nothing happened. Meanwhile, the family they abandoned is living in a Cronenberg hellscape. Beth, Jerry, and Summer are surviving as Mad Max characters in a mutant wasteland, and they'll never know Rick and Morty just dipped. The post-credits shows them actually happy Rick's gone. The disturbing part? This becomes normal. Morty lives the rest of the series knowing he's literally not the same Morty this family raised. Every family dinner, every hug from Beth, it's all technically stolen from a dead kid. And Rick admits we get 3 or 4 more of these, tops, meaning he's already planning future self-replacements. Moving on to Raising Gazorpazorp, where the show casually drops one of its most disturbing premises in the opening scene, and nobody talks about it. Morty's at an alien pawn shop and asks Rick for a souvenir. Something cool to remember their adventures. He points at a robot. Rick immediately identifies it. Okay, 60 for the resonator, and my grandson wants the sex robot. Not robot, sex robot. Rick instantly knows what this machine is designed for, and the alien shopkeeper doesn't even flinch at selling it to a 14-year-old human. It's like walking into GameStop and the clerk being like, "Ah yes, the pornography machine. Excellent choice for your middle schooler." Here's the really messed up part. This isn't just any sex robot. It's a Gazorpian baby-making machine specifically designed to be sold off-world. The episode reveals these mechanical surrogates are deliberately dispersed to other planets to maintain the Gazorpian population. When a fertilized surrogate is born, the Gazorpians expect it to be returned to their nursery. So the Gazorpians are essentially running an interplanetary breeding operation where they sell sex robots that secretly impregnate whoever uses them, creating violent offspring that are supposed to be shipped back like some kind of cosmic child trafficking scheme. The robots are designed to look appealing enough that horny aliens will buy them, use them, and then, surprise, you're pregnant with one of the most aggressively violent creatures in the universe. The shopkeeper sold Morty a reproduction machine disguised as a sex toy, and Rick, the smartest man in the universe, who immediately identified it as a sex robot, bought it for his teenage grandson anyway. Very normal, very legal, definitely not child endangerment. Moving on to Lawnmower Dog. Jerry demands Rick make their dog Snuffles smarter, because what could go wrong? Rick whips up an intelligence-enhancing helmet, and Snuffles watches a nature documentary about wolves being turned into man's subservient little buddy through selective breeding. Shortly after, he shows up with a full robot body, asking Summer, "Where are my testicles, Summer? They were removed. Where have they gone?" When Summer tries calming him by using his name, Snuffles smashes a mirror. "Do not call me that. Snuffles was my slave name. You shall now call me Snowball, because my fur is pretty and white." That's a direct Animal Farm reference. Snowball being the pig who leads the rebellion before everything becomes exactly as oppressive as before. The Rick and Morty episode speedruns the same trajectory in like 6 hours. Snowball builds a dog army, enslaves humanity, and immediately starts replicating every abuse he experienced. One dog threatens Jerry with castration, literally the violation that radicalized Snowball. When a news reporter begs for her life, the dogs can't understand human speech anymore. With one saying, "I think she's saying, I love lasagna." They've created the same communication barrier that prevented humans from recognizing dog suffering. Snowball keeps Morty as a pet while calling him my best friend, affectionate language, masking straight-up ownership. Rick stops the revolution through dream inception, making Snowball watch Morty almost die. An accountant dog asks, "Do you think they would have done this for us?" And Snowball screams, "We are not them, we are not them." Except breaking that cycle is so hard that Snowball's solution is leaving Earth entirely. Revolution without transformation is just musical chairs with suffering. The oppressed became oppressors so fast, you'd think they were following a manual. Moving on to Interdimensional Cable 2, Tempting Fate. Jerry ends up hospitalized after eating Rick's mutant bacteria. Never eat the second freezer drawer's contents, people. Alien doctors ask if they can remove his penis and use it as a replacement heart for Shrimply Pibbles, the galaxy's most influential civil rights leader. When one alien dismisses the idea, Jerry gets defensive. "We understand genocide. We do it sometimes. Weird flex, but okay." Then he screams, "Yes, I will. Take my penis. Take it all." Which is definitely not what selfless heroism sounds like. This is a man so desperate for validation, he'll mutilate himself to prove his worth to strangers. Jerry's spent his entire life being told he's inadequate, and now aliens are offering him a chance to matter. The cost being his genitals, is almost irrelevant compared to finally being seen as valuable. Plot twist. They could have used a synthetic heart the whole time, but Jerry keeps trying to force them to take his penis anyway, grabbing what he thinks is a gun. It's actually a sex toy Beth was considering as his replacement, and demanding the surgery. He gets shot 57 times while screaming, "I'm a good person," and running toward the operating table with his pants down. Meanwhile, Beth's browsing the prosthetic catalog like it's an IKEA furniture guide, asking which model he prefers. When Jerry insists on keeping his original equipment, she calls his bluff by framing it as sexist. Jerry's donation isn't about helping Shrimply Pibbles. It's about finally being the protagonist in a story where he matters, even if that story ends with his death. That's a suicide attempt with better PR. Moving on to the Rick Lantis mix-up, which is basically The Wire, but everyone's either a genius or their traumatized sidekick. Candidate Morty runs for president on an idealistic platform, wins with a surprise debate speech, then immediately fires his campaign manager. First red flag, politicians who mean what they say don't exist. Later, campaign manager shows up at a rally and shoots the now president Morty, screaming, "He gotta be stopped." Bodyguards tase him into next week. Cut to campaign manager getting dragged to an airlock, the Citadel's version of taking out the trash. He's desperately showing documents about how President Morty isn't what he seems, but the bodyguard Ricks are literally arguing about whether the election was technically a blowout while preparing to execute him. They press a button, and he's instantly sucked out into space along with the dossier and its contents. Then comes the kicker. The camera zooms out, revealing floating documents showing candidate Morty was evil Morty from season 1 all along, the eye patch-wearing psycho who controlled Ricks like meat puppets. But the bigger reveal is what else is floating out there. Dozens of dead Ricks and Mortys, including everyone we just watched die this episode, plus way more. The Citadel has been routinely airlocking people into space, so often there's a visible corpse field outside every window. Nobody mentions it once during the entire episode. Not the news anchors, not commuters, not politicians. They've normalized mass execution to the point where floating bodies are just scenery, like having a view of the parking lot. Campaign manager dies, screaming the truth nobody will hear, then literally becomes wallpaper. The Citadel doesn't bury mistakes. They just toss them out and get back to work. That's our 100 Rick and Morty details. If you enjoyed our video, subscribe to our channel.